Hey everyone, welcome back to another session of Minecraft Parkour and Absolute Chaos. Today we're diving into stories where betrayal, jealousy, and straight up sabotage get exactly what they deserve. Before we jump into everything, I just want to say, the support lately has been unreal. I didn't expect this many people to show up, drop comments, and show love. Seriously, thank you. It means a lot. So, our first story takes us into a friendship that survived years of boundary pushing pranks until one day on a mountain road, everything changed. Jake thought terror was hilarious, but he was about to learn that some jokes have permanent consequences. Now grab something cozy, settle in, and let's get into it. Jake and I go way back. I'm talking middle school, shared lockers, matching Halloween costumes, that whole cringe best friend package. We were the kind of type where we could finish each other's sentences, knew each other's subway orders by heart, and had about 1,000 inside jokes that made absolutely no sense to anyone else. For years, it worked. We were solid, but Jake had this thing. He loved pranks. And I don't mean harmless stuff like switching salt and sugar or hiding someone's keys. Jake's pranks had this edge to them, this need to see you squirm. At first, I brushed it off. He'd scare me with fake spiders, put hot sauce in my drink, lock me out on a balcony during a party. Annoying? Sure. But I figured that's just who he was. I told myself it was all in good fun, that I was being too sensitive if I got mad. Looking back, I should have seen the pattern. Every prank pushed the line a little further. Every time I said it wasn't funny, he'd double down, tell me to relax, call me dramatic. And because we'd been friends for so long, I kept giving him the benefit of the doubt. That was my first mistake. The breaking point came on a road trip last fall. We'd decided to drive up to this hiking spot about 2 hours away, one of those winding mountain roads with steep drop-offs and zero guardrails. It was just the two of us in his car, windows down, music loud, vibes good. I was in the passenger seat scrolling through my phone, totally relaxed. That's when Jake started acting weird. He started gripping the wheel tighter, his knuckles going white. Then he started tapping the brakes erratically, making the car jerk forward and back. I looked over at him, confused. And that's when he screamed, not like a playful yell, a full-on guttural scream. He started swerving violently, yanking the wheel left and right, shouting that the brakes weren't working, that we were going to crash, that he couldn't stop the car. I'm not exaggerating when I say I thought I was about to die. My stomach dropped, my hands shot out to brace against the dashboard. I could see the edge of the cliff out the window, the trees blurring past us, and all I could think was, this is it. This is how it ends. I wasn't even mad. I was just terrified. Pure, primal terror. And then he stopped, just slammed the brakes, pulled over to the side of the road, and started laughing. Not a chuckle. Hysterical, doubled over, can't breathe laughing. He turned to me, wiping tears from his eyes, and said, "Dude, you should have seen your face. I got you so good." I just sat there, shaking, nauseous. My hands were still gripping the dashboard, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack a rib. I couldn't even speak. He kept laughing, slapping the steering wheel, saying it was the best prank he'd ever pulled. He thought I'd laugh with him eventually, that I'd see the humor in it once the adrenaline wore off. I didn't laugh, I didn't say anything. I stared out the window for the rest of the drive, and when we got to the trailhead, I told him I wasn't feeling well and wanted to go home. He seemed annoyed, like I was ruining his fun, but he drove me back. The whole ride was silent except for him occasionally chuckling to himself, replaying the prank in his head like it was some kind of comedy gold. I didn't speak to him for weeks after that. He texted me constantly. At first it was apologies. Okay, maybe I went too far. My bad. But when I didn't respond, the tone shifted. He started saying I couldn't take a joke, that I was being dramatic, that he didn't mean anything by it. He sent memes about people being too sensitive. He told our mutual friends I was overreacting, painting me as the uptight one who couldn't handle a little fun. That's when everything unraveled. I started thinking about all the other pranks, not just the ones he pulled on me, but the ones I'd watched him do to other people. There was the time he convinced his ex-girlfriend her apartment was haunted by setting up speakers to play creepy noises at night. She didn't sleep for a week. There was the time he told a coworker their boss wanted to see them, then filmed their panic when they showed up and the boss had no idea why they were there. There was the time he put laxatives in brownies at a party and thought it was hilarious when people got sick. Every single one had the same thread. He didn't care how people felt. He just wanted the laugh. And the second someone got upset, he made them the problem. You're too sensitive. You can't take a joke. Relax. I realized I wasn't overreacting. I was finally seeing him clearly. So I did something I'd been too scared to do before. I compiled everything. Every prank, every cruel joke, every time someone had been hurt or humiliated and he'd brushed it off. I had screenshots of texts where he bragged about pranks. I had videos he'd posted on social media. I had messages from people he'd pranked who were still upset about it. I put it all together in a document with context, laid out his entire pattern of behavior like a case file. Then I sent it to his new girlfriend, who he'd been dating for a few months and seemed really sweet, to his boss, who prided himself on running a respectful workplace, and to his family group chat, where his parents and siblings had always enabled him, laughing off his pranks as harmless fun. The fallout was immediate. His girlfriend called him that same night. I heard through mutual friends that she was horrified, that she'd had no idea how far his pranks went, and that she didn't want to be with someone who thought cruelty was entertainment. She broke up with him within a week. His boss called him in for a meeting, apparently seeing the documented pattern of pranks, especially the ones that had humiliated coworkers, made him question Jake's judgment and professionalism. He didn't get fired, but he got a formal warning and lost a project he'd been leading. And his family. Oh, his family finally saw it. His mum called him crying, asking why he thought it was okay to treat people like that. His younger sister, who'd always looked up to him, told him she was embarrassed. They didn't cut him off, but the dynamic shifted. He wasn't the fun, charismatic golden child anymore. He was the guy who needed to grow up. Jake tried to reach out to me after everything blew up. He sent a long text, accusing me of ruining his life, saying I was vindictive, that I'd betrayed him. He said a real friend wouldn't have done this, that I should have just talked to him instead of going nuclear. I didn't respond, because here's the thing. I did talk to him. I told him his pranks weren't funny. I told him when he crossed the line, and every single time he made me feel like I was the problem. So, no, I didn't owe him another conversation. I owed myself peace. Our friendship didn't just end. I made sure his reputation crumbled with it. And honestly, I don't feel bad. He spent years making people feel small so he could feel big. Now he knows what it's like to be on the other side. You almost have to admire the audacity of thinking you can traumatize someone and then get mad when they don't protect your image. He built this version of himself where he was the funny guy, the life of the party, the one everyone loved, but it was all held together by people staying quiet. The second someone spoke up, the whole thing collapsed. He didn't just lose me, he lost the illusion. But while I was dealing with a friend who nearly killed me for laughs, someone else was fighting a battle much closer to home, one where jealousy wore the mask of friendship. Mia and I met during freshman orientation at college, bonding over our mutual hatred of icebreaker games and our shared obsession with terrible reality TV. Within weeks, we were inseparable. She was the friend who'd bring me coffee during all-nighters, who'd let me ugly cry on her couch after bad exams, who knew my Chipotle order by heart. We had that kind of friendship where you just assume it's forever, you know, the kind where you've already planned to be each other's maids of honor someday. So when I started dating in our sophomore year, it felt natural to include Mia in that part of my life too. My first real boyfriend was this guy named Connor from my economics class. Sweet guy, kind of shy, but we clicked. Mia seemed happy for me at first, always asking how things were going, wanting to hear every detail about our dates. I thought she was just being a good friend, living vicariously through my relationship, since she wasn't dating anyone at the time. Then Connor ghosted me, just completely vanished after 6 weeks of what I thought was a pretty solid relationship. No explanation, no fight, nothing. He just stopped responding to my texts and started avoiding me on campus. When I finally cornered him at the library, he looked uncomfortable and mumbled something about how I'd told him I wasn't really serious about us, that I was just experimenting with dating and didn't want anything real. I was completely blindsided. I'd never said anything like that. I told him he must have misunderstood something, but he just shook his head and walked away. I was devastated, obviously. Mia was right there with ice cream and tissues, telling me Connor was an idiot and I deserved better. She helped me dissect every interaction, trying to figure out where things went wrong. At the time, I thought she was being the perfect best friend. 3 months later, I started seeing someone else. David. A guy from my friend group who I'd had chemistry with for a while. Same story. Everything was great for about a month. Then suddenly he pulled back, saying he'd heard I wasn't actually interested in anything serious, and he didn't want to waste his time. Again, I had no idea where he'd gotten that impression. Again, Mia was there to comfort me, calling David immature and saying he clearly couldn't handle a real relationship. The pattern continued. Guy number 3, Marcus, lasted 5 weeks before ghosting me with the same vague explanation about me not being serious. Guy number 4, James, at least had the decency to break up with me to my face, but he said the same thing, that I'd apparently told someone I was just having fun and didn't see a future with him, which was absolutely not true because I'd actually really liked James. That's when I started paying attention. 4 relationships, 4 similar endings, all within 2 years. The math wasn't mathing, as they say. I started thinking back through each situation, retracing the timeline of events, and that's when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. In every single case, Mia had hung out with the guy right before things fell apart. With Connor, they'd run into each other at a party and talk for a while. With David, she'd ended up in a group study session with him. With Marcus, they'd both been at the same coffee shop and shared a table. With James, she'd offered to return a book to him that I'd borrowed. At first, I tried to dismiss it. Mia was my best friend. She wouldn't sabotage me like that. We were supposed to be each other's people. But the coincidence was too perfect, too consistent, and the more I thought about it, the more I remembered little things. The way Mia always seemed just a bit too eager to comfort me after breakups. How she'd sometimes make comments about how we didn't need boyfriends anyway, how our friendship was more important. How she'd get weird and quiet whenever I'd talk about a guy I was interested in. I didn't want to believe it, but I couldn't ignore it either. So I decided to set a trap. I started seeing this guy named Alex from my psychology class. Nice guy, good sense of humor, seemed genuinely interested. But before things got too serious, I sat him down and had what was probably the weirdest conversation of my dating life. I told him that I had a friend who might try to interfere, that she might reach out to him and say things about me that weren't true. I asked him if he'd be willing to screenshot anything suspicious and send it to me before acting on it. He looked at me like I was paranoid, but he agreed. I think he was curious to see if I was right. Sure enough, 2 weeks into dating Alex, he texted me a screenshot. My heart sank when I saw it, even though I'd been expecting it. The message was from a number he didn't recognize, but it was written as if it came from me. The text said something like, "Hey, I need to be honest with you. I'm not really looking for anything serious right now. I'm just experimenting and figuring things out. I like hanging out with you, but I don't want you to get the wrong idea. I'm not ready for a real relationship." Alex had responded asking who this was, and the person had claimed to be texting from my other phone because mine had died. It was such an obvious lie, so poorly executed, but I guess it had worked on the others because they hadn't thought to question it. I felt sick, not surprised anymore, just sick, because now I had proof that my best friend, the person I'd trusted with everything, had been systematically destroying my relationships for 2 years. Alex sent me another screenshot a few minutes later. He'd asked the number to prove they were really me by answering a question only I would know. The number had stopped responding. He texted me separately saying, "I think you were right about your friend. This is messed up. What do you want to do?" I told him I needed a day to think. Then I spent the next 24 hours going through everything. I checked phone records, cross-referenced dates, looked through old text conversations with Mia. I even reached out to Connor, David, and Marcus, asking them if they'd be willing to tell me exactly what happened when things ended. 2 of them responded, and both confirmed that they'd gotten messages supposedly from me, saying I wasn't interested in anything serious. This is where patience finally snapped. I printed everything out. The screenshots from Alex, the confirmations from my exes, the timeline showing Mia's contact with each guy right before the breakups. I put it all in a folder and asked Mia to meet me for brunch at our favorite spot near campus. She showed up smiling, completely oblivious, asking about Alex and how things were going. I let her talk for a few minutes, watched her perform this caring best friend routine that I now saw for exactly what it was. Then I pulled out the folder and slid it across the table. Her face went white as she opened it and saw the first screenshot. She tried to laugh it off at first, saying it must be some kind of misunderstanding, that someone must have spoofed my number or hacked my account, but I just sat there, silent. watching her scramble for excuses. When she finally stopped talking, I asked her one question. Why? She stared at the papers for a long time. Then she started crying. Not the pretty kind of crying, the ugly kind, the kind where you can't catch your breath. She said she was sorry, that she never meant for it to go this far, that she was just scared of losing me. She said every time I got into a relationship, I pulled away from her, started spending less time with our friendship, and she couldn't handle it. She said she was terrified of being left behind, of becoming an afterthought once I got serious with someone. I listened to all of it without saying a word, and when she finished, I told her that she'd guaranteed the exact outcome she was trying to prevent, that by sabotaging my relationships, she hadn't kept me close. She'd just made sure I'd never be able to trust her again. I told her that real friendship doesn't require isolation, that her fear of being left behind had turned her into someone I didn't even recognize. She begged me not to tell anyone, said we could work through this, that she'd get therapy, that she'd never do it again, and maybe part of me wanted to believe that. But I kept thinking about all the nights I'd cried over guys who ghosted me, all the times I'd questioned what was wrong with me, why I couldn't make a relationship work. She'd let me suffer through all of that, watched me blame myself, comforted me with lies while knowing she was the reason it kept happening. So I took out my phone, opened our mutual friend group chat, the one with about 15 people from our college circle, and I posted the screenshots, all of them, with a simple caption that said, "Found out why my relationships keep failing. Mia's been texting the guys I date, pretending to be me, telling them I'm not serious. Here's the proof." The chat exploded. Messages started flooding in immediately. Some people were shocked, some were angry, and a few admitted they'd had similar weird experiences with their own relationships, and now wondered if Mia had been involved. One girl said her boyfriend had almost broken up with her last year because of a mysterious text that sounded like her but wasn't, and she'd never figured out where it came from. Mia grabbed for my phone, but I pulled it away. She was full on sobbing now, begging me to delete it, saying I was ruining her life. I told her she'd done this to herself. Then I stood up, left money for my coffee, and walked out of that restaurant. You almost have to admire the audacity, honestly. 2 years of systematically destroying my relationships because she was afraid of being alone, and she thought she could just apologize and we'd move past it. Within a week, Mia had basically lost her entire social circle. People stopped inviting her to things, stopped responding to her messages. A few people tried to defend her at first, saying maybe it was a mental health thing, and she deserved compassion, but most of our friends couldn't get past what she'd done. The trust was just gone, and once people started comparing notes, they realized she'd been manipulative in other ways too. Little things they'd overlooked before, but now saw clearly. She tried reaching out to me a few times, long, apologetic texts that I never responded to. Eventually, she transferred schools. I heard through the grapevine that she told people at her new college that she'd left because of a toxic friend group, that she was the victim in all of this. Classic move. As for me and Alex, we actually dated for about 6 months after that. It didn't work out long term for unrelated reasons, but we ended things on good terms. And the fact that our breakup was normal, mutual, and drama-free almost felt revolutionary after everything with Mia. I learned a lot from that whole situation, about trust, about recognizing patterns, about the difference between someone being protective and someone being possessive. Real friends don't isolate you. They don't sabotage your happiness because they're afraid of change, and they definitely don't let you blame yourself for their betrayal. Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you need to watch most carefully. Jealousy between friends is one thing, but when it's your own sister weaponizing your trauma against you, that's when family becomes the battlefield. Lauren and I grew up in one of those small towns where everybody knows everybody, and leaving feels like a betrayal. She was 2 years older than me, the golden child who did everything right according to our family's standards. She stayed local, got a job at the bank in town, bought a house 3 streets away from our childhood home. I was the one who applied to colleges out of state, who wanted something different, who couldn't wait to leave. Our mum got sick during my junior year of college. Chronic illness, nothing terminal, but enough that she needed help managing daily life. I was 4 hours away, in the middle of finals, trying to figure out how to balance school with family obligations. Lauren was right there, living close, able to check in daily. It made sense for her to be the primary caretaker, and I did everything I could from a distance. I sent money every single month, whatever I could scrape together from my part-time job. I called Mom 3 times a week. I came home during breaks and summers, helped with doctor's appointments, organized her medications, deep cleaned the house. But to Lauren, it was never enough. She made little comments every time I visited about how nice it must be to just swoop in for a weekend and then leave again. How she was the one dealing with everything while I was off living my life. I tried not to take it personally. I figured she was stressed, that being the primary caretaker was exhausting, that she just needed to vent sometimes. After I graduated and got a job in the city, the comments got worse. She started making passive-aggressive remarks about how I'd abandoned the family, how I thought I was too good for our hometown now. I kept sending money, kept calling, kept visiting every few months. I thought eventually she'd see that I was doing my best. That distance didn't mean I didn't care. Then came the family reunion last summer. Big event, extended family from 3 states, the whole production. I drove in for the weekend, excited to see relatives I hadn't seen in years. But from the moment I arrived, something felt off. People were cold. Aunts and uncles who used to hug me tight barely made eye contact. Cousins I'd been close with growing up suddenly had somewhere else to be whenever I approached. I finally cornered my Aunt Patricia, asked her what was going on. She looked uncomfortable, then said she understood family dynamics were complicated, but that what I'd done to my mother was really disappointing. I had no idea what she was talking about. She seemed surprised, then explained that Lauren had told everyone I'd completely abandoned Mom when she got sick, that I refused to help financially, that I only visited once a year if that, and that Lauren had been carrying the entire burden alone. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. None of that was true, not a single word. I tried to explain, to tell my aunt about the monthly payments, the phone calls, the visits, but I could see she didn't quite believe me. Lauren had gotten to everyone first, had spent months or maybe years building this narrative where she was the martyr and I was the selfish daughter who escaped and never looked back. I confronted Lauren that night after most people had left. She denied saying anything bad about me, claimed relatives must have misunderstood, that she'd never try to make me look bad. But her face told a different story. She looked almost satisfied, like she'd finally evened some score I didn't know we were keeping. I went home furious, but decided to let it go. I told myself it didn't matter what extended family thought, that the people who really mattered knew the truth. I kept sending money to Mum, kept calling, kept being the daughter I'd always been, even if half the family thought I was trash. And here's where it gets absurd. 3 months later, Mum called me crying. She'd gone to the bank to withdraw money for a medical bill and discovered her savings account was nearly empty. She'd had about $20,000 saved up, money from selling our childhood home after Dad died, her safety net for medical expenses and emergencies. Now there was less than $3,000 left. Mum was panicking, thought maybe she'd been hacked or scammed. She asked me to help her figure out what happened. I drove home that weekend and we went to the bank together, requested full statements for the past 2 years. What we found made my blood run cold. Dozens of transfers to Lauren's personal account. Small amounts at first, a few hundred here and there, but escalating over time. Bigger withdrawals, sometimes 2 or 3,000 at once. All of them had been authorized with Mum's account information. But Mum swore she'd never approved any transfers to Lauren, beyond occasionally asking her to grab groceries or pay a utility bill. I looked at the dates. They corresponded with Lauren's sudden lifestyle upgrade over the past year. New furniture, weekend trips, a designer handbag I'd noticed at the reunion. I'd assumed she'd gotten a raise or was just treating herself, never thinking to question where the money came from. Mum was devastated. She kept saying there must be some explanation, that Lauren wouldn't steal from her. But the numbers didn't lie. We contacted the bank and they pulled up the authorization forms. Every single one had Mom's signature, except Mom's signature had this distinctive loop on the L that she'd done since I was a kid, and these signatures didn't have it. Someone had forged them. Someone who'd seen Mom sign things hundreds of times and could do a decent imitation, but not quite perfect. We filed a police report. The bank launched an investigation, and I started digging through everything I could find because I knew exactly why Lauren had spent the last year trashing my reputation to the family. She'd needed a scapegoat. When the missing money eventually came to light, she needed everyone to already believe I was the selfish, absent daughter who'd abandoned her responsibilities. That way, when suspicion started flying, I'd be the obvious suspect. Look at her, they'd say, living in the city, barely visits, probably needed money, and took advantage of her sick mother. Lauren would be above suspicion, the devoted daughter who sacrificed everything to care for Mom. It was almost impressive how calculated it was. Except she'd underestimated one thing. I keep receipts for everything. I went through 2 years of bank statements showing my monthly transfers to Mom. I pulled up call logs showing hundreds of calls. I gathered text messages where Lauren herself had admitted to things that contradicted her public story. Messages where she'd complained about Mom to me, where she'd asked to borrow money, where she'd mentioned buying things she definitely couldn't afford on her bank teller salary. The bank's investigation confirmed the signatures were forged. They found security footage of Lauren at the ATM making withdrawals from Mum's account, using a debit card that should have only been for emergencies. The police got involved for real this time, not just a report but an actual investigation. Things went from bad to unhinged. Lauren tried to get ahead of it. She called a family meeting, said she needed to talk to everyone about something serious. I think she was planning to spin some story, maybe claim Mum had given her permission and just forgot because of her illness, maybe try to implicate me somehow. But I showed up to that dinner with my own folder full of evidence. We gathered at Mum's house, most of the same relatives from the reunion. Lauren started talking, her voice shaky, saying there had been some confusion about Mum's finances. Before she could get any further, I interrupted. I said if we were talking about Mum's finances, we should probably address the $20,000 that had been stolen from her account. The room went dead silent. Lauren's face drained of color. She tried to laugh it off, said stolen was a strong word, that she'd helped Mum with bills, and maybe there was some miscommunication about repayment. That's when I opened my folder. I laid it all out. The bank statements showing the transfers, the forged signatures, the security footage the bank had provided showing Lauren making withdrawals, the timeline of her purchases that coincided with the missing money, the text messages where she'd complained about being broke, then suddenly talked about buying expensive things, and finally the receipts showing my own monthly payments to Mom, proof that I'd been helping all along, directly contradicting everything Lauren had told them about me. I was calm. That was the part I'm most proud of, honestly. I didn't yell or cry or accuse. I just presented the facts, piece by piece, and watched the family's faces change as they realized what had really been happening. Lauren tried to leave, just stood up and headed for the door, but our Uncle Mike, who's built like a linebacker and has never been one for nonsense, stepped in front of the exit. He didn't touch her, just stood there with his arms crossed and said she needed to stay and explain herself. She broke down then, started crying, saying she'd made mistakes but she was going to pay it back, that she'd been struggling financially and just borrowed a little at first, that it spiraled out of control. She claimed she was planning to replace everything before anyone noticed. She begged Mom not to involve the police. Mom just looked at her with this expression I'd never seen before, something between heartbreak and rage. She said the police were already involved, that the bank had flagged it as fraud, that this wasn't something we could just sweep under the rug anymore. Then she said the part that really hit, that stealing the money was bad enough, but trying to destroy her other daughter's reputation to cover it up was unforgivable. The family saw it all unfold in real time. No more he said, she said, no more competing narratives, just documentation and truth. Several of my aunts who'd given me the cold shoulder at the reunion came up to me afterwards, apologizing, saying they should have known better than to believe gossip without evidence. Lauren ended up facing felony theft charges. The amount she'd stolen pushed it into serious legal territory. She tried to negotiate, offered to pay everything back, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in deals. She'd forged documents, stolen from a vulnerable person in her care, and attempted to frame someone else. Those aren't the kind of charges that disappear because you say sorry. Last I heard, she took a plea deal that involved restitution, probation, and community service. She had to move back in with our aunt because she couldn't afford her house anymore after legal fees and paying Mom back. She lost her job at the bank, obviously, and the family that used to think I was the villain now won't even look at her at gatherings. I wish I could say I felt bad for her, that there was some part of me that wanted to forgive and move forward, but every time I think about considering it, I remember standing at that reunion, feeling the weight of those cold stares, knowing my own sister had orchestrated it. She didn't just steal money, she tried to steal my identity, My reputation, my place in our family. The thing about weaponizing someone's trauma or absence is that it requires everyone else to buy in, to never question the narrative you're selling. Lauren counted on people's assumptions, on small-town loyalty to the daughter who stayed, on the idea that leaving automatically makes you the bad guy. She almost got away with it too. Sometimes the best revenge is just giving someone enough rope to hang themselves. I didn't have to destroy Lauren. She managed that perfectly on her own. I just made sure everyone could see it clearly. Speaking of family secrets that detonate at the worst possible moment, nothing prepared me for what came out at a funeral. My grandfather's funeral was supposed to be a quiet affair. He'd lived a long life, 92 years. Most of it spent running a small hardware store in our town and doting on his grandkids. He wasn't rich, but he was generous with what he had, always slipping us $20 bills when our parents weren't looking, always making sure we had what we needed. When he passed, it felt like losing the anchor of our entire family. The service was beautiful in that sad, inevitable way funerals are. People shared stories about his kindness, his terrible jokes, the way he'd never learned to use a cell phone and refused to start. My grandmother sat in the front row, stoic but trembling, holding tissues she hadn't used yet. We were almost through the eulogies when my Aunt Carol stood up. Carol was my dad's older sister, the kind of person who always seemed vaguely dissatisfied with everything. She'd moved away years ago, only showing up for major holidays and usually leaving early after some manufactured argument. But she'd flown in for the funeral, wearing all black and sunglasses inside, which should have been my first red flag. She walked to the front of the room, and I remember thinking it was nice that she wanted to say something about Grandpa. Then she started talking, and the entire room went silent for all the wrong reasons. Carol's voice cracked as she began. She said she had a confession to make, something that had weighed on her for years, and she couldn't let Grandpa be buried with this secret intact. She said that Grandpa had maintained a second family in another state for over 30 years, that he had children there, kids he'd financially supported while our family scraped by. She painted this picture of him living a double life, using money that should have helped us to support these other people we'd never met. The room erupted. People started shouting questions. My dad looked like he'd been hit by a truck. My uncle was on his feet, demanding to know how Carol knew this. And my grandmother, my sweet grandmother, who'd been married to this man for 67 years, just collapsed back into her chair, all the color draining from her face. Carol kept going, crying now, saying she'd discovered this years ago, but Grandpa had begged her to keep it quiet, that he'd promised to make it right in his will, but clearly hadn't. She said we deserved to know the truth about who he really was. I sat there watching this unfold, and something about it felt wrong. Not just wrong like painful truth wrong, but wrong like performance wrong. Carol's tears seemed rehearsed. Her timing was too perfect, and the details she was giving were vague, emotional appeals without actual facts. Here's the thing. I'd been helping Grandpa with his estate paperwork for the last 2 years. He'd asked me to because I was good with organization and he trusted me. I'd seen his bank statements, his tax returns, his insurance policies. I'd helped him update his will 6 months before he died. And in all of that paperwork, in all of those documents, I'd never seen a single piece of evidence suggesting another family existed. No suspicious withdrawals, no second address, no additional dependents claimed on taxes. Nothing. After the funeral, after we'd all stumbled through the burial in a state of shock, after my grandmother had been taken home by my aunt on my mum's side because she couldn't stop crying, I went home and pulled out every piece of paperwork I had. I went through it all again, methodically, looking for anything I might have missed. There was nothing, and the more I thought about Carol's story, the less sense it made. Why would she wait until the funeral to reveal this? Why not bring it up privately to the family? Why make Grandpa's burial about this explosive secret? Then I remembered something. Grandpa's will. He'd left the bulk of his estate to my grandmother, with portions divided among his children and grandchildren. But Carol wasn't included. Not a single dollar. At the time, he'd told me it was because she'd stolen from him years ago, taken money from the hardware store when she'd briefly worked there and never paid it back. He'd been hurt by it, said he couldn't reward that behavior. But he'd asked me not to tell anyone because he didn't want to cause family drama. And here's where it gets absurd. I started to wonder if Carol's entire confession was designed to contest the will. If she could convince the family that Grandpa had been living a lie, that his judgment had been compromised, or that he owed some kind of moral debt, she might be able to argue for a redistribution of the estate. It was cynical and cruel, but it made a sick kind of sense. I needed proof, though. I couldn't just accuse her based on suspicion. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. I gave the PI everything I had. Grandpa's financial records, the cities Carol claimed the second family lived in, anything that might help verify or disprove her story. I told him I needed to know the truth, one way or another, because my grandmother was falling apart over this and deserved answers. It took the investigator 2 weeks to come back with his findings, and when he did, I felt vindicated and furious in equal measure. There was no second family. He'd checked every lead, every possible connection in the cities Carol had mentioned. No other children, no secret accounts, no property in another state, nothing. Grandpa's finances were exactly what they appeared to be, the modest savings of a man who'd worked hard and lived simply. But that wasn't even the worst part. The investigator had also looked into Carol's recent activities, trying to understand her motive. He found emails, not to the supposed second family, obviously, because they didn't exist, but to a lawyer. A shady estate attorney with a history of helping people contest wills through questionable means. In the emails, Carol laid out her entire strategy. She wrote about how Grandpa had cut her out of the will, how she needed to create enough chaos and doubt to force the family to settle outside of court. She literally used the phrase, "If I can make them believe he was lying about everything else, they'll question the will too." She discussed manufacturing evidence, planting seeds of doubt, and using the funeral as the perfect dramatic moment to drop the bomb. It was all there. Her plan, her motive, her complete willingness to destroy our family's memory of Grandpa, just to get money she felt entitled to. I felt sick reading those emails. This was my aunt, someone I'd known my entire life. And she'd stood up at her own father's funeral and told a calculated lie designed to break our family apart. I immediately took everything to the family lawyer, the one handling Grandpa's estate. I showed him the PI's report, the emails, all of it. He was stunned. He said in 30 years of practicing estate law, he'd seen family members do terrible things, but this was exceptional in its cruelty. We decided to wait until the official will reading to address it. The lawyer wanted Carol present, wanted her to have to face what she'd done in front of everyone. The will reading was scheduled for 2 weeks after the funeral. By that point, the family was fractured. Half believed Carol's story, half didn't, and my grandmother was so devastated she barely left her house. My dad wasn't speaking to Carol, but my uncle was defending her, saying she'd had the courage to tell a difficult truth. We all gathered in the lawyer's office. Carol showed up looking smug, probably thinking her plan was working. The lawyer began by going through the standard provisions, explaining how the estate would be distributed. Then he paused and said he had something important to address before proceeding. He pulled out the investigator's report and started reading. The lack of evidence for any second family, the financial records showing no unusual activity, and then the emails. He read them aloud, every single one. Carol's words, her strategy, her admission that she'd fabricated the entire story. The room was dead silent except for his voice, calmly and methodically destroying her credibility. Carol tried to interrupt, saying the emails were fake, that someone was setting her up. But the lawyer had already verified their authenticity. They'd come from her personal email address, from her IP address, with metadata that proved they were real. My dad stood up and walked out without saying a word to her. My uncle, who'd been defending her, looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor, and my grandmother, who'd been silent this whole time, just shook her head and said, "How could you do this to your own father?" Things went from bad to unhinged. Carol started yelling, saying we were all against her, that she deserved part of the estate regardless, that Grandpa had been wrong to cut her out. She said he'd been senile, that I must have manipulated him into changing the will. It was desperate and ugly, and everyone just stared at her. The lawyer waited until she finished, then calmly explained that due to her actions, she was being removed from any potential claim to the estate entirely. Not that she'd had one to begin with, but this made it legally airtight. He also informed her that the family was filing a restraining order to keep her away from my grandmother, who was too fragile to deal with this kind of manipulation. Carol left the office screaming about lawyers and lawsuits, threats that everyone knew were empty. That was the last time most of us saw her. She stopped coming to family events, stopped reaching out. A few cousins maintained contact with her, but even those relationships were strained. She'd effectively exiled herself through her own greed and cruelty. My grandmother eventually recovered once she knew the truth. It took months of reassurance, of showing her the evidence that Grandpa had been faithful and honest. But she got there. She said knowing he hadn't betrayed her made it possible to grieve properly. The thing is, Carol could have just asked for help if she was struggling financially. Grandpa might have been hurt by what she'd done years ago, but he wasn't vindictive. If she'd apologized, made amends, he probably would have softened. But instead, she chose to burn everything down, to tarnish his memory and traumatize her own mother, all for money she was never going to get. Imagine being this confidently wrong, this certain that your lies would work, that you could manipulate an entire family at a funeral and get away with it. The ego required for that kind of scheme is almost impressive in its dysfunction. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Seriously, the sheer audacity of some people never ceases to amaze me. Make sure to subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know if this kind of family betrayal is universal, or if I'm just cursed with the wildest stories. Alright, back to Carol's spectacular downfall. Actually, that was Carol's downfall, complete and total. But her story taught me something important about family. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from. Grandpa's funeral became Carol's last family event, just like the lawyer said it would be. And honestly, we're all better off for it. Family lies are destructive, but when your own mother tries to gaslight you about your entire childhood, the betrayal cuts deeper than any funeral confession. My mother has always been a storyteller, not in the fun, gather round the campfire way, but in the carefully constructed narrative that makes her the hero way. For as long as I can remember, she's told everyone who'd listen about how hard she had it, how she raised me completely alone after my father abandoned us when I was 3. No child support, no help, no contact. Just her, sacrificing everything, working multiple jobs, doing it all by herself because he couldn't be bothered to stick around. I grew up hearing this story so many times, it became background noise. She'd tell it at family gatherings, to her friends, to my teachers, to anyone who'd give her even a shred of sympathy. And people ate it up. My grandmother would shake her head and call my father terrible names. Family friends would praise my mother's strength. Even my therapist, who I started seeing in high school for anxiety, would validate how hard it must have been for her. How trauma from abandonment can echo through generations. The thing is, I didn't really remember my dad. I had maybe 2 or 3 fuzzy memories, flashes of images that could have been real or could have been constructed from old photos. A man with dark hair, a green jacket, someone pushing me on a swing. That was it. And because I had nothing concrete to hold on to, I just accepted my mother's version of events. Why wouldn't I? She was there. She raised me. If she said he left and never looked back, then that must have been true. I didn't question it until I was 26 and engaged to my now husband, Tyler. We were planning the wedding, dealing with all the typical family drama that comes with merging 2 families, when out of nowhere I got a Facebook message from someone claiming to be my father. My first instinct was to delete it, maybe even block him, because who reaches out after 23 years through social media? But something made me read it first. The message was short. He said he understood if I didn't want to talk to him, that he'd respected the boundaries set by the court for years, but that he'd never stop thinking about me. He said he had things he wanted me to know, things about what really happened, and if I was willing to meet for coffee, no pressure, he'd like to share his side. He left his phone number and said he'd understand if I didn't respond. I sat with that message for 3 days, just staring at it, reading it over and over. Part of me wanted to show it to my mother, but something held me back. Maybe it was the way he mentioned the court, or boundaries, or his side, like there was more to the story than I'd been told. Eventually, curiosity won. I texted him. We met at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. I was so nervous I thought I might throw up. But when I saw him walk in, there was this weird jolt of recognition. Like my brain knew him even though I consciously didn't. He looked older, obviously, grayer, but I could see myself in his face. Same nose, same eyes. We talked for 4 hours that first meeting. He didn't trash my mother, didn't try to turn me against her, just calmly told me what happened from his perspective. He said they'd split when I was 3, that it was messy but not abusive, and that he'd wanted joint custody. He said my mother fought him on everything, that she wanted full custody and no visitation, and when he pushed back legally, things escalated. And here's where it gets absurd. He pulled out his phone and showed me scanned documents, court records, a restraining order my mother had filed against him when I was 4, claiming he'd been violent and threatening. He showed me the judge's ruling, how the restraining order was eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, but by then the damage was done. He showed me years of child support checks, cancelled and cashed, proving he'd been paying support the entire time, despite what my mother claimed. He showed me letters he'd written to me that were returned unopened, emails to my mother begging for visitation that went unanswered, birthday cards he'd sent to my grandmother's house, hoping they'd reach me. I felt like the floor was falling out from under me. Everything I'd believed about my childhood, about why I grew up without a father, was built on lies. He didn't abandon me. He was pushed out, erased, and my mother had not only allowed me to believe he didn't care, she'd actively built an entire victim narrative around his absence. The worst part, and I mean the absolute worst part, was when he played me a voicemail. He'd kept it all these years, saved on old phones and transferred over every time he upgraded. It was my mother's voice, younger but unmistakably hers, telling him that she didn't want him confusing me with his presence, that I was better off thinking he didn't care than having him pop in and out of my life. She said it was easier for everyone if I just forgot about him, that she could give me stability without his interference. She'd made a calculated decision to erase him, not because it was better for me, but because it was easier for her. And then she'd spent 2 decades playing the martyr, soaking up sympathy and praise for doing it all alone, when the reality was she'd actively prevented me from having a relationship with my father. I went home that night and didn't say anything to my mother. I couldn't. I needed time to process, to figure out what to do with this information. But she must have sensed something was off because she started hovering, asking if I was okay, if wedding planning was stressing me out. It took everything in me not to scream at her. A few weeks later, we had my engagement party. Big event, lots of family and friends, the works. My mother gave a speech, a long, tearful speech about how proud she was of me, how she'd raised me to be strong and independent, despite all the challenges she'd faced as a single mother. She talked about the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the struggles of doing it alone. People were crying. My grandmother was nodding along, and I just sat there, watching her perform, knowing it was all bullshit. That's when I decided what I was going to do. I wasn't going to confront her privately. I wasn't going to give her the chance to spin another story, to gaslight me into doubting what I knew. I was going to let the truth speak for itself, in front of everyone who'd spent years believing her lies. I spent the next few months working with my dad, compiling everything. We organized the court documents chronologically. We gathered the cancelled checks. We included screenshots of the return letters and emails, and we put together a video montage, a timeline of evidence that told the real story of what happened after my parents split. The wedding rehearsal dinner was at a nice restaurant, close family and friends only, about 50 people. My mother was in her element, soaking up attention, talking about how emotional she was that her baby was getting married. During dinner, I stood up and said I wanted to share something special, a video I'd put together about family and truth. The lights dimmed. The video started playing on the big screen we'd set up for toasts. At first, people seemed confused. There were images of court documents, child support checks, letters. Then my father's face appeared, reading excerpts from the emails he'd sent begging to see me. Then the voicemail. My mother's voice crystal clear, admitting she'd kept him away on purpose. The room went completely silent. I watched my mother's face go from confused to pale to horrified in the span of about 30 seconds. She stood up, knocking over her wine glass, and started yelling that this was a lie, that I was being manipulated, that my father had twisted everything. But the evidence was right there, undeniable, time-stamped and documented. About half the guests got up and left with her, mostly her side of the family, people who were too invested in her narrative to accept the truth. But the other half stayed. They sat there, stunned, processing what they'd just seen. My grandmother, my mother's own mother, walked over to me with tears streaming down her face and apologized. She said she'd never questioned the story, that she should have pushed harder to know what really happened, that she was sorry I'd grown up without my father because of lies. Other people came up too, hugging me, apologizing for believing her version without question. A few of my mother's friends admitted they'd always thought parts of her story didn't add up, but had never said anything. It was validating in the strangest, saddest way. My father, who'd been sitting quietly in the back of the room, came up to me after most people had left. He didn't say I told you so or act smug about being vindicated. He just hugged me and said he was glad I knew the truth now, that he understood how hard this must be, and that he'd be there for whatever I needed going forward. The wedding itself was beautiful. My dad walked me down the aisle. It should have been this monumental, emotional moment, and it was. But it was also bittersweet because I kept thinking about all the moments we'd missed. All the birthdays, the school events, the little everyday things that make up a relationship with a parent. My mother had stolen that from both of us. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. My mother wasn't invited to the wedding. I sent her a message the day after the rehearsal dinner, telling her she was no longer welcome, that I needed space to process everything, and that if she wanted any chance of a relationship with me in the future, she needed to take accountability for what she'd done. She responded with a wall of text blaming my father, saying he'd poisoned me against her, that I was breaking her heart. Classic deflection. I didn't respond. It's been almost a year now. My mother and I haven't spoken. She's tried reaching out through relatives, sending cards, even showing up at my grandmother's house, hoping to run into me. But I'm not ready. Maybe I never will be. Because it's one thing to make a mistake, to mess up and own it. It's another thing entirely to build a decades-long lie, to manipulate everyone around you into believing you're a victim, and then refuse to acknowledge any of it when you're caught. The relationship I've built with my dad over the past year has been incredible, though. We're still figuring each other out, still learning how to be in each other's lives, but it feels right. He's kind, thoughtful, patient with my questions and my anger about lost time. He never tries to replace the years we missed, just focuses on being present now. I think about my mother sometimes, about whether she genuinely believed her own narrative or if she always knew she was lying. I think about how many people enabled her, how easy it was for her to rewrite history because no one bothered to ask for proof. And I think about how close I came to never knowing the truth, to getting married and having kids and raising them with a grandmother who'd feed them the same lies she fed me. The people who stayed at my wedding, who listened to the truth and chose to believe evidence over emotion, those are the relationships I'm investing in now, the ones built on honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, because I spent 26 years living in someone else's fiction, and I'm done with that. Imagine being so committed to playing the victim that you'd sacrifice your daughter's relationship with her father. That takes a special kind of selfish. While my mother was rewriting history, my brother decided to rewrite biology itself, and what he uncovered nearly destroyed us all. I did one of those ancestry DNA tests on a whim last year. You know the kind, spit in a tube, mail it off, wait 6 weeks to find out you're like 12% Scandinavian or whatever. I wasn't expecting anything crazy. My family's pretty straightforward, mostly European mutts with some distant relatives we never talk to. I just thought it'd be fun to see the breakdown, maybe find some third cousins I'd never meet. The results came back pretty much as expected, mostly European, a chunk of Scandinavian, a tiny percentage of this and that. Nothing surprising, nothing dramatic. I looked at it for about 10 minutes, shared it with my parents who found it mildly interesting, and then basically forgot about it. Just another thing I'd done out of curiosity that didn't really change anything. But then my brother Ryan started acting weird. Ryan's 4 years older than me, always been the golden child type. Successful job in finance, nice apartment, engaged to this woman named Melissa, who seemed sweet if a little high-strung. He'd always been kind of private about his life, but we were close enough. We'd grab drinks every few weeks, he'd come to family dinners, normal sibling stuff. So when he started asking me strange questions about the DNA test, a few weeks after I got my results, I didn't think much of it at first. He asked if the company kept your data forever, if other people could access it, if there were privacy settings I should know about. I told him it was all pretty secure, that you could delete your data if you wanted, But I hadn't bothered because who cares, right? He seemed unsatisfied with that answer, kept pressing about whether family members could see each other's results or if the database cross-referenced with other people's tests. I laughed and told him he was being paranoid, that it was just an ancestry site, not the FBI. He dropped it after that, but something felt off. Ryan wasn't usually the paranoid type. He was the guy who had every aspect of his life organized and under control. Seeing him anxious about something as mundane as a DNA test was strange. Then I got a notification email from the testing company about unusual login activity on my account. Someone had accessed it from an IP address I didn't recognize, changed some settings, and requested a new test kit be sent to my address. I figured it was a glitch or maybe some kind of phishing scam, so I changed my password and didn't think much more about it. But that wasn't even the worst part. A few days later, I was at my parents' house for dinner and mentioned the weird login thing to my mum. She got this confused look on her face and said that was strange because Ryan had stopped by the week before asking if any mail had come for me. He'd said he was helping me with something and needed to grab a package. My mum had given him a box that had arrived, assuming it was fine since we were siblings, and he seemed like he knew what he was talking about. The pieces started clicking together in the worst way possible. Ryan had logged into my account, ordered a replacement kit sent to my parents' address where he knew he could intercept it, and taken it before I ever knew it existed. But why? What could he possibly need with my DNA test? I called the company, explained the situation, and asked if they could tell me what happened with that second kit. The customer service rep was hesitant at first because of privacy policies, but when I explained that someone had stolen my account and potentially submitted a fraudulent sample, they escalated it to a supervisor. After some back and forth and verification of my identity, they confirmed that yes, a second sample had been submitted under my name, but the results were flagged as inconsistent with my original test. Basically, it was obviously not my DNA. It was Ryan's. He'd stolen my login, ordered a new kit, and submitted his own sample under my name to see what would come up in the database without attaching his real identity to it. The question was why? Why would my successful, put-together golden child brother need to secretly run his DNA through a database while hiding his identity? I started digging. I'm not proud of it, but I went full investigator mode. I checked his social media, which was pretty sanitized and normal. Melissa, his fiancée, tagged him in stuff regularly. Engagement photos, dinner dates, the usual couple content. But then I noticed something weird in some older photos, ones from a few years back that he'd been tagged in but hadn't posted himself. There was a woman who wasn't Melissa, and there were kids. 2 little kids who called him dad in the comments. I felt my stomach drop. I reverse image searched one of the photos and found the woman's Facebook profile. Her name was Jennifer, and her relationship status said married. Her last name was the same as Ryan's. She had albums full of family photos, Ryan with the kids, Ryan at birthday parties, Ryan on family vacations, all dated from 5 years ago up until about 8 months ago, right around the time he got engaged to Melissa. Ryan was married, or had been married, and he had 2 kids. I checked public records because at this point I was in too deep to stop. Marriage certificate from 6 years ago in a different state. Ryan and Jennifer, all legal and official. No divorce filing that I could find, which meant he was still legally married to Jennifer while engaged to Melissa. My brother was living a double life. He had a whole entire family in another state that none of us knew about, and he was planning to marry someone else without ever getting divorced from his first wife. And here's where it gets absurd. The DNA test wasn't about ancestry or curiosity. Ryan had stolen my test and submitted his own sample because he was terrified that if Jennifer or her family ever did one of those DNA tests, the database might flag familial connections and expose him. He was trying to see if his DNA would ping any matches that could lead back to his secret family, using my account so it wouldn't be traced to him directly. It was the most paranoid, overcomplicated scheme I'd ever heard of, and it was exactly the kind of thing Ryan would do because he always thought he was the smartest person in the room. I sat on this information for about 2 days, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to confront him directly, but I knew he'd just lie, manipulate, try to explain it away. He'd been living this double life for years without anyone catching on. He was good at deception, so I decided to go nuclear. I found Jennifer on Facebook and sent her a message, told her who I was, that I was Ryan's sister, and that I had some information she needed to see. I sent her screenshots of his engagement photos with Melissa, the announcement posts, everything. I told her that as far as I knew, they were still legally married and he was planning to marry someone else. She responded within an hour. She'd known something was wrong for months, that Ryan had become distant, that he'd taken a job that required him to travel constantly, but she'd never suspected another woman, let alone an entirely separate life. She was devastated, furious, and ready to burn his world down. Then I contacted Melissa. Same approach, same evidence, except this time I included the marriage certificate, the photos of Ryan's kids, the proof that he'd been lying to her about everything. Melissa, to her credit, didn't fall apart. She got cold and calculating, started asking me for details, for documentation, for anything that could help build a case. The two women started talking to each other. I connected them through email and then stepped back and watched it unfold. They coordinated, compared stories, realized the extent of Ryan's lies. He told Jennifer he was traveling for work, staying in corporate apartments. He told Melissa he was estranged from his family and had no ties to his past. Both stories were elaborate fabrications designed to keep his two lives separate. They decided to confront him together. Jennifer flew in from out of state, and they both showed up at Ryan's apartment unannounced. I showed up too because honestly, I wasn't going to miss this. I brought popcorn as a joke, but also kind of not as a joke. Ryan opened the door expecting Melissa and found both of them standing there. The look on his face was something I'll remember forever. Pure panic. The color draining from his face, his brain visibly short-circuiting as he tried to figure out how to talk his way out of this. He couldn't. There was no explanation that would work. No lie smooth enough to cover what he'd done. Jennifer demanded to know if he'd ever planned to divorce her. Melissa demanded to know if anything he'd told her was true. Ryan stammered, tried to apologize, tried to say it wasn't what it looked like, but both women just stared him down until he gave up. Things went from bad to unhinged when they told him they'd already contacted lawyers. Bigamy is illegal, turns out, and Ryan had technically committed fraud by entering into a second engagement while still married. Jennifer was filing for divorce and pressing charges. Melissa was suing him for emotional distress and fraud. Both of them had documentation, evidence, timelines, everything they needed to bury him legally. Ryan turned to me, standing in the hallway with my metaphorical popcorn, and had the nerve to ask why I'd done this to him. I told him I hadn't done anything except tell the truth. He'd done this to himself when he decided to live two separate lives and steal my DNA test in some paranoid attempt to cover his tracks. The fallout was spectacular. Ryan's facing actual jail time for bigamy, which I didn't even know was still prosecuted until all this happened. He's going through 2 divorces simultaneously, which is apparently a legal nightmare. His job found out because the charges became public record, and he got fired for ethics violations. Our parents are horrified and humiliated, though my mum keeps trying to make excuses for him, saying he must have been going through something, that this isn't who he really is. But here's the thing, this is exactly who he is. He's someone who thought he could control every variable, manipulate every situation, and keep everyone in separate boxes so he'd never have to face consequences. He built this elaborate double life and maintained it for years, lying to everyone who trusted him, all because he wanted everything without having to choose, and all of it came crashing down because he stole my spit. The irony is almost poetic. He was so paranoid about DNA databases exposing him that he committed the exact act that led to his exposure. He handed me the evidence of his paranoia, which made me dig deeper, which unraveled his entire fabricated existence. I don't feel bad about what I did. Maybe that makes me cold, but I watched 2 women and 2 innocent kids get used as props in Ryan's selfish fantasy. He didn't just lie, he built entire false realities for multiple people, wasted years of their lives, and would have kept going if he hadn't messed up. The best part is he can't even blame anyone but himself. Every choice that led to this moment was his. Stolen DNA is one thing, but a forged will that rewrites an entire family's future, that's where things get truly sinister. When my grandmother passed away last spring, I expected the grief. What I didn't expect was the absolute circus that followed. Grandma had always been the glue holding our family together, the one person who could get everyone in the same room without a fight breaking out. She was fair, thoughtful, and meticulous about everything, especially family matters. So when the will reading happened and the lawyer announced that she'd left her entire estate to my cousin Derek, every single person in that room went silent. We're talking about her house, a beautiful three-bedroom in a neighborhood that had appreciated like crazy over the years. Her savings, which weren't a fortune but were definitely substantial. Her car, which was newer and fully paid off. Family heirlooms, jewelry, everything. All of it to Derek. Just Derek. Now, I'm not saying I expected to inherit a mansion or anything, but Grandma had always, and I mean always, talked about wanting things split equally among her grandchildren. There were 5 of us, and she'd made comments for years about making sure we were all taken care of, that no one would feel left out or slighted. She'd even joked about it at family dinners, saying she didn't want us fighting over her stuff when she was gone, so she was going to make it simple and fair. This was not simple, and it definitely wasn't fair. Derek, for context, was the golden child who could do no wrong in some relatives' eyes, but he'd always rub me the wrong way. He had this slick salesman energy, always working an angle, always positioning himself as the favorite. He'd visit Grandma more often than the rest of us in her final years, which at the time seemed sweet. Now, looking back, it felt calculated. At the will reading, Derek played the part perfectly. He acted humble, almost embarrassed, saying he was honored by Grandma's trust and that he'd make sure to respect her wishes. He said all the right things while the rest of us sat there in shock, trying to process how this had happened. My aunt started crying, my mom looked like she'd been slapped, and Derek just sat there with this serene, grateful expression that made my skin crawl. Here's where it gets absurd. Derek immediately started pushing to close out the estate. He wanted probate finished as fast as possible, kept emailing the lawyer about expediting everything, pressuring family members to sign off on their shares, which in this case meant signing away any claim since he'd inherited everything. He said it would be easier for everyone, less legal fees, less drama. Just sign and move on. Something felt wrong. The urgency, the pressure, the way Derek was suddenly so concerned about saving the family money on legal fees when he'd never been the practical, considerate type before. Plus, Grandma's decline had been pretty rapid. She'd been in hospice for the last month of her life, barely conscious, on heavy pain medication. The idea that she'd been lucid enough to draft an entirely new will during that time didn't sit right. So I asked to see the original will, just the physical document, not a copy. Derek got defensive immediately, asking why I needed to see it, saying the lawyer had already confirmed its validity, that I was being disrespectful to Grandma's final wishes. But I pushed. I told the lawyer I wanted to examine the document before signing anything, which was my legal right. When I finally got to look at it, my stomach dropped. I'm not a handwriting expert, but I'd seen Grandma's signature 1,000 times. Birthday cards, Christmas checks, notes she'd leave around the house. Her handwriting in her later years had gotten shaky, a little uneven, the natural result of age and arthritis. The signature on this will was too clean, too smooth, too perfect. It looked like someone had traced her signature, or practiced it until they got it right. And the date on the will was from about 3 weeks before she died, right in the middle of her hospice stay, when she was barely able to speak, let alone sit up and sign legal documents. I took photos of the signature and the document details, then went home and dug through old cards and papers Grandma had signed. The difference was obvious. The will signature had none of the natural shakiness, none of the slight inconsistencies that came with her aged hands. It looked computer-generated almost, or at least carefully forged. That's when I hired a forensic document examiner. It cost me about $1,500 I didn't really have, but I needed to know. I sent them high-resolution scans of the will and samples of Grandma's real signature from various points in her life, including documents from around the same time period as the supposed new will. The examiner's report came back 2 weeks later and confirmed what I'd suspected. The signature was forged. The ink analysis showed it was inconsistent with what would be expected from a hospitalized elderly woman. The pressure points were wrong, the flow was too controlled, and most damning, the paper itself had markings that suggested it had been printed recently, not stored for weeks in a law office file. I took that report straight to the probate court and filed a formal challenge to the will. I included the expert testimony, the timeline showing Grandma's medical state when she supposedly signed, and requested a full investigation. Derek lost his mind. He called me screaming, saying I was tearing the family apart over money, that I was disrespecting Grandma's memory, that I was going to regret this. His lawyer sent threatening letters about frivolous litigation and wasting the court's time. But the court took it seriously. They froze the estate and launched an investigation, and that's when everything started to unravel. Turns out Derek had worked at the law office that had drafted Grandma's original will years ago. He'd been a paralegal there for about 6 months before getting fired for reasons that were never fully explained to the family. But during that time, he'd had access to client files, document templates, and most importantly, Grandma's signature on file from her real will. Investigators found that Derek had used those templates to create a new will, forging Grandma's signature with what looked like digital manipulation and printing. The witnesses listed on the forged will were two of Derek's friends, neither of whom had ever met Grandma. When questioned, they initially tried to stick to Derek's story, saying they'd witnessed her sign it at the hospice. But under pressure and the threat of perjury charges, one of them cracked. He admitted Derek had paid them each $500 to sign as witnesses and lie about the circumstances if anyone ever asked. The whole thing fell apart. Derek had forged an entire will, fabricated witnesses, and tried to steal an estate worth well over $500,000 when you added up the house value, savings, and assets. The court invalidated the forged will and located Grandma's actual will from years earlier, the one filed properly with her longtime attorney. Just like she'd always said, it split everything equally among her 5 grandchildren. The house would be sold and proceeds divided, savings split 5 ways, personal items distributed based on a list she'd made of who'd expressed interest in what over the years. It was fair, thoughtful, exactly what Grandma would have wanted. Derek got nothing. Actually, worse than nothing. He's now facing criminal charges for fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. His lawyer friends are facing their own charges for false witnessing and fraud. Last I heard, Derek's looking at possible jail time and definitely a criminal record that'll follow him forever. He's tried to apologize to the family, claiming he was desperate financially and made a terrible mistake, but nobody's buying it. You don't accidentally forge a will and pay off witnesses. My family's relationship with Derek is obviously destroyed. My aunt, his own mother, barely speaks to him. She's mortified and heartbroken. The rest of us just want nothing to do with him. He showed up to Grandma's memorial service, which happened months after all this because we'd delayed it during the legal battle, and people literally turned their backs on him. The estate is finally being distributed now, almost a year after Grandma's death. It took way longer than it should have because of Derek's scam, and the legal fees ate into the inheritance more than they would have otherwise. But at least it's being done right, the way Grandma actually wanted. I think about how close Derek came to getting away with it. If I hadn't trusted my instincts, if I hadn't been willing to spend the money on that forensic examiner, if I'd just signed off like he wanted, he would have stolen everything. The house would be his, the money would be his, and Grandma's actual wishes would have died with her. Imagine being this confidently wrong, thinking you could forge legal documents in the modern age and no one would check. The arrogance of it still blows my mind. He really thought he was smarter than everyone, that he could manipulate the system and walk away clean. Instead, he destroyed his life, his reputation, and any relationship he had left with our family, all because he was too greedy and too lazy to wait for his fair share. From family betrayals to romantic deceptions, the lies people tell in relationships can be just as devastating, especially when a business trip becomes the unraveling of an entire future. Mark and I had been together for 4 years. Engaged for 8 months, he was everything I thought I wanted. Stable job in consulting, close with his family, talked about our future like it was already written. We'd picked a venue, sent save the dates, started the whole wedding planning circus that slowly consumes your life. I was happy, or at least I thought I was. Mark traveled a lot for work, client meetings, conferences, site visits. Sometimes he'd be gone 3 days, sometimes a full week. It was part of the package when I started dating him, and I'd made my peace with it. He was always good about staying in touch, sending photos of hotel rooms and conference centers, complaining about airport food. It felt normal, routine. Then last October, he told me about a big conference in Chicago. 3 days, important clients, couldn't miss it. I didn't think much of it until my own boss mentioned I'd be flying to Chicago that same week for a meeting with a potential vendor. Different part of the city, different purpose, but same dates. I thought it was funny, told Mark maybe we could grab dinner one night since we'd both be there. He got weird about it, said his schedule was packed, that he'd be in back-to-back sessions all day, and client dinners every night, that it probably wouldn't work out. I suggested breakfast then, or just meeting for coffee. He kept deflecting, making excuses, until finally he just said he'd try, but couldn't promise anything. That's when the little voice in my head started whispering, the one you ignore because you don't want to be that person, the paranoid girlfriend who doesn't trust her partner. But I couldn't shake it. His reaction was off. Too defensive, too quick to shut down something that should have been exciting, a chance to see each other during a work trip. I did something I'm not proud of. I checked his location sharing. We'd had it on for years, one of those relationship things that felt practical more than controlling. Find each other at crowded events, know when someone's close to home so you can time dinner. Normal stuff. Except when I opened the app, his location was turned off. He'd never turned it off before, not once in 4 years. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe his phone died. Maybe he turned it off to save battery during the conference. Maybe I was being crazy and this was nothing, but it sat in my stomach like a stone, heavy and cold. When I got to Chicago, I called his hotel. He'd sent me a confirmation email weeks ago, a nice place downtown near the conference center. I called the front desk, said I was trying to reach my fiancé Mark, gave his last name. The receptionist put me on hold, came back, and said they had no reservation under that name. I asked her to check again. She did. Nothing. No Mark, no reservation, no record of him ever booking a room. My hands were shaking when I hung up. I sat in my own hotel room, staring at the wall, trying to figure out what this meant. Maybe he'd booked under the company name. Maybe there was a mix-up. Maybe there was some explanation that would make sense once I heard it. But I already knew. Deep down, I knew. I didn't confront him. I didn't call or text demanding answers. Instead, I did something I never imagined doing. I hired a private investigator. I found one through a quick search, a woman with good reviews who specialized in infidelity cases. I felt gross doing it, like I was admitting my relationship was broken, but I needed to know. I gave her everything. Mark's schedule, his car make and model, his photo, the cities he claimed to travel to for work. She called me 3 days later with her initial findings. Mark wasn't in Chicago. He wasn't at any conference. He was at a house in a suburb about 2 hours from where we lived, a quiet neighborhood with good schools and sidewalks where people walked their dogs, and he wasn't alone. The PI sent me photos, Mark's car in the driveway, Mark walking up to the front door with grocery bags, Mark sitting on the porch with a woman laughing, Mark playing catch in the backyard with a little girl who looked about 7 or 8. The photos were dated and time-stamped. During his supposed business trips, she kept digging, found social media profiles for the woman, posts going back 3 years showing her and Mark at restaurants, at parks, on a beach vacation. The little girl called him Mark in one video, showed him a drawing she'd made. In the comments, people called them a cute family. Someone asked when they were getting married. The woman had responded with a blushing emoji. 3 years. He'd been living a double life for 3 years, and I'd had no idea. I sat with that information for a week. The PI kept sending updates, more photos, more evidence. Doorbell camera footage she'd obtained showing him kissing this woman goodbye in the mornings, screenshots of their shared Amazon account, orders for furniture and kids' toys, a paper trail of a whole separate existence. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt numb, like I was watching this happen to someone else. The man I was supposed to marry, the person I'd built a life with, was a complete stranger. And here's where it gets absurd. Our engagement party was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Big event, both families coming in from out of town, friends flying in to celebrate. We'd booked a nice venue, hired a caterer, put together a whole thing. Mark kept asking if I was excited, talking about the party like everything was normal. I smiled and nodded and said, of course I was excited. I didn't cancel the party. Instead, I planned something else. I worked with the PI to compile everything. Every photo, every piece of evidence, every receipt and social media post and doorbell video. I put it all into a slideshow, set to autoplay, organized chronologically so you could watch the relationship develop in real time. 3 years of lies laid out in excruciating detail. The engagement party came, Everyone showed up dressed nice, excited, bringing gifts even though we'd said not to. Mark was in a great mood, working the room, hugging relatives, playing the role of devoted fiancé. His parents cornered me at one point, gushing about how happy they were that their son had found someone like me. I waited until everyone was seated for dinner. Then I stood up, clinked my glass like I was about to give a toast. Mark smiled at me from across the table, probably expecting some sweet speech about our love story. I said I wanted to share some special memories with everyone, moments from our relationship that really showed who we were as a couple. I nodded to my friend Sarah, who was in on the plan, and she hit play on the slideshow displayed on the big screen we'd rented for the party. The first photo came up, Mark and the other woman at a restaurant, holding hands across the table. The date stamp showed it was from 2 years ago, right around the time Mark had told me he was in Denver for a client pitch. The room went completely silent. More photos. Mark with the little girl on his shoulders at a zoo. Mark and the woman kissing on a porch. Mark in the background of what was clearly a birthday party for the child, wearing a party hat. Screenshot of the woman's Facebook post, calling him her partner, her rock, the best stepdad her daughter could ask for. People started pulling out their phones, trying to figure out if this was real. Mark stood up, his face bright red, saying this was insane, that those photos were fake, that I'd lost my mind. He tried to grab the laptop controlling the slideshow, but Sarah moved it out of reach. Then came the breaking point. The doorbell footage played, crystal clear video of Mark kissing this woman goodbye, telling her he loved her, promising to be back in a few days after his trip. The audio was perfect, his voice unmistakable, saying words to her that he'd said to me 1,000 times. His mother started crying. His father stood up and blocked Mark's path when he tried to leave, demanding to know what the hell was going on. My own parents just sat there looking stunned, not sure whether to comfort me or confront him. I let the slideshow finish. The last slide was a screenshot of their Amazon order history, showing they'd bought a crib together 6 months ago. Apparently, the woman was pregnant. That was news even to me. The PI had just sent that over the night before. Mark finally stopped trying to deny it. He just stood there, surrounded by both our families and all our friends, caught in the most public way possible. He tried to explain, said it was complicated, that he'd made mistakes but he loved me, that we could work through this. I walked over to him, took off my engagement ring, and placed it on the table in front of his mother. I told her she might want to return it or save it for her son's next engagement, assuming any woman would be stupid enough to trust him. Then I handed her a folder containing the full PI report, every piece of documentation, every lie catalogued and proven. I thanked everyone for coming, apologized that they'd traveled for nothing, and walked out of my own engagement party. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Mark tried calling me hundreds of times that night. I blocked him. He showed up at my apartment banging on the door. I called the cops and got a restraining order filed the next morning. His parents called, apologizing, saying they'd had no idea, that they were horrified. I believed them. They'd seemed genuinely devastated at the party. The other woman found out about me through social media. Someone from the party had posted about what happened, and it went semi-viral in our social circle. She called me crying, saying Mark had told her we'd broken up 2 years ago, that he was just tying up loose ends before they could go public with their relationship. She'd had no idea he was still with me, still planning a wedding. We were both victims of the same liar, but that wasn't even the worst part for Mark. His company found out. Turns out he'd been falsifying expense reports, billing the company for travel he wasn't actually doing for work, using company funds to maintain his double life. When HR got wind of everything through office gossip, they launched an investigation. He got fired within a week for ethics violations and potential fraud. Last I heard, they were considering pressing charges. Both relationships imploded. The other woman left him, took her daughter, moved in with her parents. I kept the ring, had it appraised, sold it, and used the money to book a solo trip to Ireland. His reputation in our social circle, his professional network, his family's trust, all of it gone, and I didn't have to do much beyond show people the truth. He destroyed himself. I just made sure everyone could see it clearly. Looking back, the signs were there. The turned-off location sharing, the defensiveness about schedules, the way he always had just enough detail in his stories to seem credible, but never quite enough to verify. I'd ignored it all because I wanted to believe in the life we were building. But the life was never real, just another performance in his collection of lies. At least my ex's lies were eventually obvious, but what happens when the messages you find aren't just suspicious, they're absolute proof hiding in plain sight? I wasn't snooping. I need to make that clear from the start because everyone always assumes that's how these stories begin, with someone going through their partner's phone looking for evidence of something they already suspect. That's not what happened. Taylor and I had been together for 3 years, living together for the last year and a half, and things had been good, or at least I thought they were good. We had our routines, our inside jokes, our plans for the future. Nothing felt off enough to make me suspicious. We were having a regular movie night, the kind we'd had 100 times before. Taylor's iPad was on the coffee table because we'd been looking up something earlier, some random trivia about the movie we were watching. Their phone was synced to the iPad, one of those automatic Apple things where messages show up on all devices. I wasn't paying attention to it until notifications started popping up in the corner of the screen. At first, I ignored them. Someone was texting Taylor, so what? But then I caught a glimpse of the preview. Heart emoji. Something about missing them, a flirty tone that made my stomach clench. I glanced over at Taylor, who was absorbed in the movie, completely unaware of the messages lighting up their iPad 3 feet away from me. I shouldn't have looked, I know that. But once you see something like that, once that seed of doubt gets planted, you can't just unknow it. So I picked up the iPad, trying to be casual about it, and opened the messages. The contact name was Sam. Just Sam. No last name, no emoji, nothing distinctive. And the messages went back months. I started scrolling, my heart pounding harder with every swipe. Flirty texts, inside jokes I wasn't part of, complaints about me, about how I didn't understand Taylor like Sam did, about how Taylor wished things were different. There were plans to meet up, references to places they'd gone together, photos from outings I recognized as times Taylor had said they were doing something solo, or with co-workers. But that wasn't even the worst part. As I kept scrolling, I started recognizing context clues, references to specific conversations I'd witnessed, mentions of events I'd been at. And then it clicked. Sam wasn't some random person Taylor had met online or reconnected with secretly. Sam was Taylor's old friend from college, the one who'd been around our life for the past 8 months, who'd been invited to our dinners, our game nights, even our anniversary party 2 months ago. I'd met Sam multiple times. I'd made conversation with them, laughed at their jokes, welcomed them into our home. And the entire time, they'd been having an affair with my partner right in front of me. The messages made it clear this wasn't just emotional, either. There were references to hotel rooms, to sneaking away during group events, to stolen moments when I was working late or out with my own friends. I sat there on our couch, iPad in my hands, Taylor sitting next to me completely oblivious, and felt my entire reality shift. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship, about our life together, was built on lies, and the person I'd trusted most in the world had been betraying me for 8 months while I smiled and played host to their affair partner. I didn't say anything that night. I finished the movie in silence, made some excuse about being tired, and went to bed early. Taylor didn't notice anything was wrong, which honestly made it worse. I laid there in the dark, listening to them scroll through their phone in the other room, probably texting Sam, and tried to figure out what to do. By morning, I'd made a decision. I wasn't going to have some private confrontation where Taylor could cry and apologize and try to manipulate me into forgiveness. I wasn't going to give them the chance to control the narrative or make excuses. They'd humiliated me publicly by carrying on this affair in front of our friends, so they were going to be exposed publicly. I spent the next day screenshotting everything, every flirty text, every plan they'd made, every photo they'd shared, every complaint about me, every reference to their physical affair. I organized it chronologically, made sure the context was clear, and then I crafted a message to send to our entire friend group. The message was simple. Guess who's been Taylor's real partner this whole time? Attached were the screenshots, enough evidence that there could be no denying what had been going on. I hit send to our group chat, the one with about 15 of our closest friends, including several people who'd been at events where Taylor and Sam had been secretly hooking up. The responses came in immediately. Shock, anger, support for me, outrage at Taylor and Sam. Several people said they'd suspected something, but hadn't wanted to say anything without proof. Others said they felt sick thinking about all the times we'd hung out as a group while this was happening behind the scenes. Then I packed Taylor's things. Not everything, just enough to make the point. Clothes, toiletries, their laptop, personal items. I put it all in boxes and garbage bags and stacked them by the door. Then I changed the locks. Our apartment was in my name, the lease was mine, and I had every legal right to remove them from the space. I sent Taylor a text, simple and direct. Your stuff is by the door, locks are changed, have Sam come pick it up. Then I blocked their number. Here's where it gets absurd. I'd told a few of our friends what I was planning, and word had spread. By the time Taylor and Sam showed up at the apartment, there were people watching from nearby units, from the courtyard, from their cars. Not a huge crowd, but enough that Taylor and Sam's walk of shame was witnessed by the people who'd been lied to right along with me. Taylor tried knocking, then banging on the door, yelling about how we needed to talk, how I was being unreasonable, how they could explain. I didn't answer, just sat inside listening to them spiral, knowing our friends were watching this whole humiliating scene play out. Eventually, they gave up on getting me to open the door and started loading their stuff. Sam had driven over, and watching them work together to pack up the evidence of Taylor's life with me while our friends looked on was probably the most satisfying thing I'd seen in months. They both looked mortified, avoiding eye contact with anyone, rushing to get everything loaded and get out of there. One of our friends, Marcus, walked up to them as they were finishing. I heard him through the door. He told them they were both disgusting, that what they'd done was inexcusable, and that they deserved each other. A few others echoed similar sentiments. By the time Taylor and Sam drove away, they'd been thoroughly dressed down by people who used to be their friends. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Our entire friend group cut them off. Not just me, everyone. Group chats were reformed without them. Event invites stopped. People who'd known them for years wanted nothing to do with them. Taylor tried reaching out to mutual friends, tried to explain their side, but the screenshots spoke for themselves. There was no explaining away 8 months of deliberate deception and betrayal. Taylor lost our apartment, which had been in a great location and way below market rent. They lost our friend group, which had been their primary social circle. They lost the relationship they'd claimed to value while simultaneously destroying it. And for what? For Sam, the person who'd knowingly participated in cheating, who'd sat at our dinner table and smiled at me while sleeping with my partner. The thing is, cheaters always think they're the exception. They think their situation is special, that their connection with their affair partner is so profound it justifies the betrayal. Taylor and Sam probably told themselves they were in love, that what they had was real, that I just didn't understand Taylor the way Sam did. They built this whole narrative where they were the protagonists in some romantic story, instead of what they actually were, two selfish people willing to hurt someone who trusted them. I heard through mutual friends that Taylor and Sam actually tried to date properly after everything imploded. It lasted about 6 weeks before they broke up. Turns out when your entire relationship is built on the thrill of sneaking around and the validation of being chosen over someone else, it doesn't hold up well in the harsh light of reality. Who would have thought that two people willing to lie and cheat might not make the most trustworthy partners to each other? The worst part, or maybe the best part depending on how you look at it, is that Taylor apparently expected me to eventually forgive them. They sent emails months later talking about how they'd made a mistake, how they missed me, how they wanted to work things out, as if I'd take back someone who'd betrayed me for 8 months straight, who'd brought their affair partner into our home, who'd let me build a life with them while they were building a secret life with someone else. I never responded. There was nothing to say. They'd made their choices, faced the consequences, and that was that. I moved on slowly but surely, rebuilt my social life, focused on my own healing. It took time to trust people again, to not second-guess every friendship, every relationship. But I got there. Looking back, I'm grateful for that synced iPad. Grateful that I found out when I did instead of wasting more years with someone who clearly didn't respect me. And I'm grateful I handled it the way I did, because watching Taylor and Sam face the social consequences of their actions gave me closure that a private confrontation never would have. Being cheated on is brutal, but being falsely accused of cheating while they had someone waiting in the wings, that's a special kind of betrayal. Jordan and I were together for 2 years. Not perfect, but solid enough that I thought we had a future. We talked about moving in together, adopting a dog, the usual relationship progression stuff. Then about 4 months before everything fell apart, Jordan started getting weird. It started small. Questions about where I'd been, who I was texting, why I was smiling at my phone. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone gets a little insecure sometimes, right? I'd reassure Jordan, show texts if asked, explain that I was just messaging my sister or laughing at a meme. Normal stuff. But the questions kept coming, getting more pointed, more frequent. Why was I working late so often? Who was I really meeting when I said I was going to the gym? Why did I seem distant lately? The thing is, I wasn't doing anything different. Same job, same routine, same group of friends I'd had for years. But Jordan had decided something was wrong, and no amount of evidence to the contrary seemed to matter. The accusations escalated over the next few months. Jordan started showing up at my office unannounced to see if I was really working late. Checked my location obsessively, asked mutual friends if they'd seen me out with anyone. It was exhausting and confusing because I genuinely had no idea what had triggered this paranoia. Then one night, about 3 months into this nightmare, Jordan completely lost it. We were at my apartment and Jordan demanded to go through my phone. Not just glance at a text thread, but full access. Read every message, check every app, look through photos. I was hurt that it had come to this, that 2 years of trust meant nothing, but I handed it over because I had nothing to hide. Jordan spent over an hour going through everything. My texts with friends, family, co-workers, my emails, my social media DMs, photo albums, search history, everything, and found absolutely nothing because there was nothing to find. I sat there watching Jordan desperately look for evidence of an affair that didn't exist, and I realized this relationship was broken in a way I couldn't fix. When Jordan finished and handed my phone back, I expected an apology, some acknowledgement that the accusations had been unfair, that maybe we needed to talk about what was really going on. Instead, Jordan just looked at me and said, I must be really good at hiding it, that my phone was too clean to be real, that nobody's phone is that innocent. You can't win against that kind of logic. If I'd had something incriminating, I'd be a cheater. Since I didn't, I was just a better liar. There was no scenario where I could prove my innocence because Jordan had already decided I was guilty. 2 weeks later, Jordan broke up with me, said the trust was gone, that the relationship couldn't survive without it, that it was better to end things now than drag it out. I was devastated, but also relieved. The constant accusations, the surveillance, the paranoia had turned our relationship toxic. Maybe ending it was the healthiest thing for both of us. Then, 2 days after the breakup, Jordan posted a photo on Instagram. A couple photo, all smiles and casual intimacy, with someone named Chris. The caption was something about new beginnings and finding happiness. 2 days. We'd been broken up for 2 days, and Jordan was already publicly coupled up with someone else. I looked at Chris's profile. It was public, full of photos documenting a very active social life. And there, scattered throughout the last several months, were photos with Jordan. Jordan at a kickball game in June. Jordan at a barbecue in July. Jordan at a concert in August. All of these while we were still together, all during the period when Jordan was accusing me of cheating. The dates matched up perfectly. The accusations had started right around the time Jordan met Chris through this kickball league. Every time Jordan had questioned my behavior, accused me of being suspicious, demanded to know where I was and who I was with, it was because Jordan was doing exactly those things and projecting it onto me. And here's where it gets absurd. I started going through the photos more carefully, cross-referencing dates with my own calendar. There was a photo of Jordan and Chris at a brewery on a Tuesday night in July. That was the same night Jordan had accused me of being sketchy about working late. The night Jordan had shown up at my office to check on me. While I was actually at the office, Jordan had been out with Chris, then come to surveil me, then gone home and started a fight about my supposed dishonesty. Another photo showed them at a Saturday morning farmers market in August. That was the day Jordan had interrogated me about going to the gym, insisted on checking my location, acted like my routine workout was evidence of an affair. Meanwhile, Jordan had been on what was clearly a date, buying overpriced organic vegetables and posing for cute couple photos. The hypocrisy was staggering. Jordan had built an entire case against me, manufactured suspicion and distrust, all while actively involved with someone else, and then used that fabricated doubt as justification to end our relationship, so Jordan could move on without looking like the bad guy. I felt sick, not heartbroken anymore, just disgusted. This person I'd loved and trusted had gaslit me for months, made me question my own behavior, put me through emotional hell, all to cover their own infidelity. I started reaching out to mutual friends, casually mentioning the timeline, asking if they'd known about Chris. A few admitted they'd seen Jordan and Chris together at group events, assumed they were just friends from kickball, didn't think anything of it. One friend, though, said they'd thought it was weird how much Jordan talked about Chris, how many inside jokes they seemed to have, but hadn't wanted to start drama by saying anything. I compiled everything, screenshots of Chris's Instagram photos with Jordan, time-stamped and dated, my own calendar showing what I was actually doing on those dates, text messages from Jordan accusing me of various things, matched up with photo evidence of Jordan being out with Chris, statements from friends confirming they'd seen them together during our relationship. The evidence was overwhelming. Jordan had been cheating for at least 4 months before our breakup, possibly longer, while simultaneously accusing me of the exact thing Jordan was doing. I thought about just letting it go, moving on, being the bigger person. But then I remembered all the nights I'd stayed up wondering what I'd done wrong, all the times I'd defended myself against baseless accusations, all the friends who'd heard Jordan's version of our breakup and probably thought I'd been unfaithful. So I posted it, a calm, factual thread on social media, laying out the timeline with evidence. No emotion, no name-calling, just dates and photos, and a simple explanation that I was setting the record straight about why our relationship ended. I tagged Jordan in it so there was no confusion about who I was talking about. The response was immediate. Friends who'd been giving me sympathetic but slightly judgmental looks after the breakup started apologizing. People who'd congratulated Jordan on the new relationship started asking uncomfortable questions. Chris, who apparently hadn't known the full timeline either, posted something vague about being lied to and took down all the couple photos. Then came the breaking point. Chris's ex reached out to me, someone I'd never met, but who'd apparently been through this exact scenario with Jordan a year before I even met them. Jordan had started dating Chris while still with this ex, done the same projection routine, accused the ex of cheating while actively pursuing someone else, then ended that relationship to be with Chris. The pattern was identical. We compared notes, the timeline, the accusations, even some of the specific phrases Jordan had used. It was like reading a script Jordan followed for every relationship transition. Meet someone new, start an emotional or physical affair, project that guilt onto the current partner through accusations, manufacture enough conflict to justify a breakup, immediately go public with the new person. I added this information to my thread with the ex's permission. Not to pile on, but because people deserve to know this was a pattern, not a one-time mistake. Jordan wasn't someone who'd slipped up once. This was calculated, repeated behavior. Jordan's reputation imploded. The new relationship with Chris lasted maybe 3 weeks after all this came out before Chris ended it. Jordan tried damage control, claimed I was a bitter ex making things up, but there were too many receipts, too much evidence, too many people confirming the timeline. Even Jordan's closest friends started distancing themselves, posting vague things about honesty and integrity. The last I heard, Jordan had moved to a different city, started over with people who didn't know the history. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe Jordan will actually work on whatever drives this pattern of behavior, but I doubt it. What gets me is how calculated it all was. The accusations weren't paranoia or insecurity. They were cover, a preemptive strike to muddy the waters, make me look suspicious so Jordan's eventual cheating would seem justified or at least explainable. It's almost impressive in its manipulation, the way Jordan managed to be the victim and the villain simultaneously. I'm doing better now. Dating again, slowly, with a much better radar for red flags. The whole experience taught me that sometimes the person accusing you the loudest is the one with something to hide, and that trust isn't just about believing your partner, it's about being with someone who doesn't weaponize your honesty against you. Projection is a cheater's favorite weapon, But when someone goes full scorched earth with fabricated screenshots, that's when you fight fire with nuclear evidence. My ex Alex and I dated for about 2 years before things fell apart. The breakup was messy but not nuclear, or at least I thought it wasn't. We had the usual arguments about who got what from the apartment, some back and forth about shared expenses, but nothing I considered war-worthy. I figured we'd both move on, maybe run into each other awkwardly at mutual friends' parties for a while, and eventually fade into being polite strangers. That's how adult breakups are supposed to work, right? Turns out Alex had other plans. About a month after we split, I started getting weird messages from friends. People I'd known for years asking if I was okay, if I wanted to talk about what happened. At first, I thought they were just being supportive about the breakup, which was nice but unnecessary. Then one of my closer friends, Jessica, called me directly and asked point blank if I'd really cheated on Alex. I was so confused I actually laughed. Cheated? I'd never cheated on anyone in my life. I asked her where she'd gotten that idea, and she said Alex had shown her screenshots of text messages where I apparently admitted to hooking up with someone else multiple times during our relationship. She said the messages also showed me trash-talking Alex's family, calling them names, saying I'd only stayed with Alex for financial support. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. None of that was true. Not a single word. I told Jessica that, insisted I'd never sent messages like that, and she went quiet on the other end of the line. She said the screenshots looked real, that Alex seemed genuinely hurt, and that other people had seen them too. She wanted to believe me, but the evidence seemed pretty damning. That's when I realized this wasn't just one friend. Alex had been showing these fake screenshots to everyone. Our mutual friend group, my co-workers who Alex had met at company events, even my family. My mum called me that same week, voice shaking, asking if the things she'd heard were true. Someone had sent her screenshots too. Then came the breaking point. My HR department called me into a meeting. Apparently, Alex had sent screenshots to my workplace email and copied my manager, claiming I'd been using company resources for personal affairs and had made threatening statements about stealing from the company. The messages showed me allegedly discussing how to embezzle funds and cover my tracks. It was insane, completely fabricated, but HR had to take it seriously. They put me on administrative leave pending an investigation. I sat in that meeting, numb, trying to explain that none of this was real, that my ex was making it all up. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. Why would Alex go to this much trouble if it wasn't true? What did Alex have to gain by lying? The screenshots looked legitimate enough that people were willing to believe them. I went home and did what I do with everything important. I pulled my backups. I'm obsessive about digital records, always have been. Every text message, every email, every conversation automatically backed up to cloud storage. I have years of data archived because I'm paranoid about losing important information, and now that paranoia was about to save me. I pulled up my complete message history with Alex. Every single text we'd ever exchanged, time-stamped and preserved exactly as sent. Then I compared them to the screenshots Alex was spreading around. The fake messages were good, I'll give Alex that. They used the right contact name, the right general format, even similar language to how I actually text. But they weren't perfect. The timestamps were wrong, showing conversations happening at times when I could prove I was somewhere else. The font was slightly off, just different enough that if you looked closely, you could see it didn't match the standard messaging app. And entire conversations were completely fabricated, allegedly taking place on dates when Alex and I hadn't even been talking, according to my real records. But I needed more than my own word. I needed proof that would hold up under scrutiny, something undeniable. So I hired a digital forensic expert, someone who specializes in authenticating electronic communications and detecting forgeries. The expert's report came back 2 weeks later, and it was beautiful. They confirmed that the screenshots Alex had been sharing were created using a fake text generator app, one of those websites where you can create realistic-looking message threads with whatever content you want. The metadata was all wrong. The image files had been created recently, not back when the conversation supposedly happened. The font rendering didn't match any actual messaging platform. It was a complete fabrication, and now I had expert testimony saying so. And here's where it gets absurd. I also discovered that Alex had been sloppy about covering tracks. We'd shared a computer during our relationship, one we used for streaming and casual browsing. I still had access to the browsing history because Alex had never thought to clear it or change the passwords. Right there in the search history, dated just days after our breakup, were searches for how to fake text messages, best fake text generator apps, and can fake text screenshots be detected. Alex had literally Googled how to frame me and then followed through with it. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report: my original authentic message history, the forensic expert's analysis, screenshots of Alex's searches, testimony from friends about when and how Alex had shared the fake images. I had everything I needed to prove not just that the messages were fake, but that Alex had deliberately created them to destroy my reputation. I filed a defamation lawsuit. My lawyer said it was one of the clearest cases she'd seen because we had actual proof of fabrication and malicious intent. Defamation cases are usually hard to win because you have to prove the person knowingly lied with intent to harm, but Alex had given me a gift by documenting the entire process in search history. While the lawsuit was moving forward, I decided to go public. I created a detailed post on social media laying out everything that had happened. I included side-by-side comparisons of the fake screenshots and my real message history. I posted excerpts from the forensic report. I showed Alex's search history, and I explained how someone I'd trusted had tried to ruin my life with calculated lies. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Friends who'd believed Alex reached out apologizing, horrified that they'd fallen for it. My job reinstated me with an apology once they saw the evidence. My family was relieved and furious on my behalf. But more than that, the post got shared. A lot. It went beyond just our social circle and became a cautionary tale about fake screenshots and digital defamation. Alex's employer saw it. Turns out, working at a company with strict ethics policies and then being publicly exposed for fraud isn't great for job security. Alex got fired within a week, the company citing ethics violations and damage to their reputation by association. Friends started cutting contact with Alex, not because I asked them to, but because once you know someone is willing to fabricate evidence and lie that extensively, what else are they capable of? The trust was gone. Alex became radioactive in our social circle. The lawsuit moved forward. Alex's lawyer tried to settle early, offering a small payment if I'd agree to drop it and sign an NDA. I refused. I wanted the public apology, the admission of wrongdoing, the official record that this had happened. My lawyer pushed hard, and eventually Alex's side caved. The settlement included a formal public apology posted on Alex's social media accounts, admitting to creating fake screenshots and spreading false information with intent to harm my reputation. It included financial damages, enough to cover my legal fees, and then some. And it included an agreement that Alex would not contact me or anyone in my immediate circle again. But the best part, the thing I didn't even plan for, was the lasting internet footprint. When you search Alex's name now, the first page of results includes articles and posts about the fake screenshot fraud. My original detailed post ranks high. Reddit threads discussing the situation come up. Alex's name is permanently linked to being someone who faked evidence and got caught. That digital scarlet letter will follow Alex for years, maybe forever. Future employers will see it. Future romantic partners will see it. Anyone who Googles before getting involved with someone will find it. Alex tried to destroy my reputation and ended up destroying their own instead. Looking back, I think what bothers me most isn't even the lies themselves, but the calculation behind them. Alex didn't do this in a moment of anger or hurt. This was planned, researched, executed methodically with the goal of making me suffer. That takes a level of malice I didn't think Alex was capable of, but I also learned something about documentation and preparation. If I hadn't been obsessive about backups, if I hadn't saved everything, I would have had no way to prove my innocence. It would have been my word against manufactured evidence, and manufactured evidence looks a lot more convincing than verbal denials. The friends who believed the fake screenshots without asking me first, who were willing to cut me off based on images they saw, I've had to reassess those relationships too. Some apologized genuinely, and we've rebuilt trust. Others I've kept at arm's length because, if it was that easy to turn them against me once, what's to stop it from happening again? Alex reached out once after the settlement, using a burner email to say they were sorry, that they'd been hurt and angry and made terrible choices. I didn't respond. Sorry doesn't undo the damage. Sorry doesn't give me back the month I spent on administrative leave, the stress of wondering if I'd lose my job, the conversations with family members who questioned whether they really knew me. Actions have consequences, and Alex is living with those consequences now. Fake screenshots are amateur hour compared to what happened next, when a complete stranger convinced half my social circle we were dating. I thought someone was playing a prank when the first congratulations message came through. My college friend Emma texted me saying she was so happy I'd found someone, that Morgan seemed great from the photos. I stared at my phone, genuinely confused, and texted back asking what she was talking about. She sent me a link to an Instagram account. The account was public, filled with couple photos, except half of the couple was me. My face, my clothes, pictures I recognized from my own social media. But I'd been photoshopped next to someone I'd never seen before. Someone who apparently went by Morgan. The captions were detailed, talking about our first date at this Italian restaurant downtown, about how we'd met at a mutual friend's party 6 months ago, about inside jokes and shared moments that had never happened. I felt my skin crawl. This wasn't a prank. This was something way worse. I went through the entire account, my hands shaking as I scrolled. There were dozens of photos spanning months, each one doctored to look like we were together. Pics of me at the park with Morgan's arm, photoshopped around my shoulders. A coffee shop photo where I was supposedly gazing adoringly at them across the table. Even vacation photos, my images from a solo trip I'd taken to the coast, now featuring Morgan in the background, or sitting next to me on the beach. The details were disturbingly specific. Morgan had created entire narratives around photos I'd posted innocently. That picture of me holding a coffee cup. Now it was from our second date, where we talked for hours. The sunset photo from my trip, our romantic getaway where Morgan had proposed we make things official. Every caption read like we were in a loving, committed relationship that had been going on for half a year. I reported the account immediately. Instagram took it down within a few hours, which I thought was the end of it. Weird, creepy, but resolved. I posted on my own social media clarifying that I was single, that those photos were fake, that I'd never met anyone named Morgan, and definitely wasn't in a relationship with them. That should have been it. Except it wasn't. 3 days later, the account was back. Different handle, same photos, same detailed captions. I reported it again. It got taken down. It came back again with a new name. This cycle repeated 4 times in 2 weeks. Each time, Morgan added new photos, new stories, more elaborate details about our supposed relationship. Friends started asking questions. Some believed me immediately, but others seemed uncertain. The fake relationship looked so real, so carefully constructed, that people who didn't know me well started to wonder if maybe I was the one lying, if maybe this was some weird attempt to hide a real relationship for privacy reasons. Morgan's attention to detail was that convincing. And here's where it gets absurd. Morgan wasn't just making fake social media accounts. They were telling people we were together in real life. I found out when a co-worker mentioned running into my partner at the grocery store, said Morgan had introduced themselves and chatted about me for 10 minutes. My co-worker described them, and the description matched the person from the fake photos. Morgan was out there, in my city, telling strangers and acquaintances that we were dating. I started getting Facebook friend requests from people I didn't know, mutual friends with Morgan apparently, people who'd been told about our relationship and wanted to connect with me. Some of them sent messages congratulating us, asking when the wedding was, saying Morgan talked about me all the time. I was terrified. This wasn't just online harassment anymore. This was someone actively constructing a false reality and involving other people in it. Someone who apparently knew where I lived, where I worked, where I spent my time. Someone who was watching me closely enough to steal my photos and insert themselves into my life. I went to the police first, filed a report for harassment and identity theft. The officer I spoke with was sympathetic, but said without a direct threat or physical confrontation, there wasn't much they could do immediately. They took my statement, documented everything, and said to keep reporting the accounts and collecting evidence. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator. I needed to know who Morgan actually was, how they knew me, what their endgame was. I gave the PI everything, all the fake accounts, screenshots of the photos, descriptions from people who'd met Morgan in person, any detail I could think of. The PI came back with answers in less than a week, and what they found made my blood run cold. Morgan was someone I'd had a 30-second interaction with at a coffee shop 4 months ago. I'd been leaving, they'd been entering, they'd held the door for me. I'd smiled, said thank you, and walked away. That was it. That was the entirety of our interaction. A polite smile and 2 words, and from that, Morgan had constructed an entire fantasy relationship in their head. They'd followed me on social media after that encounter, learned everything they could about me from my public posts, and started building this fictional narrative where we were together. But that wasn't even the worst part. The PI dug deeper and found that I wasn't Morgan's first victim. There were 3 other people over the past 5 years who'd experienced similar situations. Morgan would have a brief, meaningless interaction with someone, decide that interaction meant something profound, and then create an elaborate false relationship, complete with fake social media presence and real-world storytelling. 2 of the previous victims had gotten restraining orders. The third had moved cities to get away from Morgan. Each time, Morgan had escalated slowly. Started with social media, then moved to involving mutual acquaintances, then to showing up in places where the victim frequented. In one case, Morgan had tried to attend a victim's family event, claiming to be their partner. The pattern was consistent and absolutely chilling. Armed with this information, I went back to the police with the PI's full report. This time, they took it more seriously. The history of similar behavior, the evidence of escalation, the pattern of stalking across multiple victims, it all added up to something they could act on. They opened an investigation and reached out to Morgan's previous victims to build a stronger case. I filed for a restraining order, including everything. The fake social media accounts, screenshots of the photoshopped images, witness statements from people Morgan had lied to, the PI's report showing the pattern of behavior, testimony from previous victims. The judge granted it immediately, calling Morgan's behavior disturbing and potentially dangerous. Then came the breaking point for Morgan's whole fantasy world. Police arrested them for stalking, harassment, and identity theft. When they searched Morgan's apartment, they found printed photos of me, a journal detailing our supposed relationship with dates and events that had never happened, and plans for future milestones, like anniversaries and meeting each other's families. They found similar materials related to the previous victims, evidence of an obsessive pattern that had been going on for years. The case made local news because of how bizarre and extensive it was. I gave permission for my story to be shared, hoping it might warn others or help people who'd experienced something similar feel less alone. I posted about it on my own social media with copies of the court documents, the restraining order, and a clear explanation of what had happened. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of people reached out saying they'd believed Morgan's story, apologizing for not questioning it more, expressing horror at how convincing the lies had been. Others shared their own experiences with stalkers and online harassment, creating this unexpected community of people supporting each other. Morgan's accounts were permanently banned from every major social media platform. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all of them coordinated to prevent Morgan from creating new profiles. They were also facing criminal charges, multiple counts of stalking and harassment across several victims, identity theft, and violations of previous restraining orders. The legal process took months. Morgan tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that we really were in a relationship, and I was just trying to hide it for some reason. But the evidence was overwhelming. The photoshopped images, the testimony from previous victims, the journal entries describing interactions that had never occurred. It all painted a clear picture of someone with a dangerous pattern of delusional behavior. Morgan was eventually convicted and sentenced to probation with mandatory psychiatric treatment, along with permanent restraining orders from me and the other victims. Part of the sentencing included a ban on social media use and requirements to check in regularly with a probation officer. I still think about that moment at the coffee shop sometimes, that innocent smile and thank you that somehow became the foundation for someone's elaborate fantasy. It makes me hyper-aware now of every interaction, every polite exchange with strangers, not in a paranoid way, but in a cautious way, a reminder that you never really know how someone else is interpreting your actions. The whole experience taught me that privacy settings matter, that trusting your gut when something feels off is important, and that taking action early can prevent escalation. I also learned that stalking and harassment aren't always obvious, that they can wear the mask of a relationship, of normalcy, while being deeply disturbing underneath. Friends ask me sometimes if I'm scared Morgan will try again when the legal consequences fade. Honestly, I don't know. I hope the treatment helps, that they get the mental health support they clearly need. But I also know to stay vigilant, to keep my social media more private, to be aware of my surroundings. The strangest part is thinking about the other victims, the ones who went through similar experiences before me, who tried to warn others but weren't believed or taken seriously until it escalated further. I'm grateful to them for documenting their experiences, for building the paper trail that made my case stronger. And I hope by sharing my story, I'm doing the same for whoever might come after. You shouldn't have to defend your reality against someone else's delusion. You shouldn't have to prove that a relationship doesn't exist. But when someone is determined enough to construct an elaborate lie, you have to fight back with the truth, loudly and with evidence, until people believe you. Stalkers online are terrifying, but when workplace sabotage involves planted evidence and a colleague determined to destroy you, that's a corporate nightmare. I've been working at the company for 5 years, steadily climbing the ladder, putting in the hours, doing everything right. When a senior position opened up in my department, my manager basically told me it was mine. I'd been groomed for it, had the experience, had put in the work. It felt like everything was finally falling into place. Then one morning, I walked into the office and got called into a meeting with HR and my manager, and I knew immediately something was very wrong. They told me there had been a serious breach. Confidential client information had been leaked to our competitors, and the emails had come from my account. They showed me printouts, technical specifications we'd been developing, pricing strategies, client lists, all sent from my email address to known contacts at rival companies. The timestamps went back weeks, dozens of emails, a clear pattern of corporate espionage. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I tried to explain that I hadn't sent those emails, that someone must have hacked my account, but even as I said it, I could see they didn't believe me. Why would they? The evidence was right there, my email address, my login credentials. HR said I was being suspended immediately pending a full investigation. They escorted me out of the building like I was some kind of criminal. I had to leave my laptop, my files, everything. People stared as I walked past their desks, and I knew the rumors were already starting. I went home in shock, trying to process what had just happened. My career was imploding, and I had no idea how to stop it. I kept replaying those emails in my head, trying to figure out how someone could have sent them from my account. Our IT security was supposed to be solid. We had two-factor authentication, regular password changes, the whole setup. But someone had gotten in, and now I was taking the fall for it. The company assigned an investigator, some third-party cybersecurity firm brought in to examine the breach. I cooperated fully, gave them access to everything, but I could tell they were treating me like the prime suspect. The IT department confirmed the emails had definitely come from my login, sent during work hours on days I'd been in the office. It looked airtight. I was terrified. If this stuck, I wasn't just losing my job and the promotion. I could face criminal charges for corporate espionage. I could be blacklisted from the entire industry. Everything I'd worked for would be gone. I spent 3 days barely sleeping, going over every possibility, every explanation, until I remembered something that gave me the first real hope I'd had since this started. Our office had security cameras, detailed ones covering every floor, every entrance, time-stamped and archived. And our IT system kept extensive access logs, not just login times, but IP addresses, physical location data, everything. If someone had been accessing my account, there would be traces. I hired a lawyer, a good one who specialized in employment law and corporate investigations. She immediately requested full access to the IT records, the security footage, and all documentation related to the suspended emails. The company pushed back at first, claiming it was part of their internal investigation and they couldn't share it. But my lawyer insisted. If they were going to accuse me of corporate espionage, I had the right to examine the evidence. And here's where it gets absurd. When the full IT logs came through, my lawyer and I spent an entire weekend going through them with a fine-tooth comb. What we found was damning, just not for me. The emails had been sent from my account, yes, but several of them were sent from an IP address that wasn't anywhere near the office. It was a residential address in a different part of the city. When we cross-referenced the times those emails were sent with the office security footage, I was clearly visible at my actual desk, working on completely different tasks. Someone had remote access to my account. They'd been logging in from outside the office and sending these emails while I was physically present and accounted for elsewhere in the building. My lawyer requested more detailed logs, specifically looking at any unusual access patterns in the weeks before the leak started. That's when we found the keylogger. IT records showed that 3 weeks before the first leaked email, there was unusual software activity on my workstation. A program had been briefly installed, ran in the background for about 2 hours, then was deleted. But the logs showed exactly when it happened. It was after hours on a Friday night when I definitely wasn't there. I checked my calendar. I'd left early that day for a dentist appointment. We pulled the security footage from that specific time frame, and there, clear as day, was my coworker Brett sitting at my desk. He'd come back to the office after most people had left, sat down at my computer, and spent exactly 2 hours doing something before leaving. The timestamp matched perfectly with when the keylogger had been installed. Brett was the other person up for the promotion. We'd been friendly, or so I thought. Grabbed lunch sometimes, compared notes on projects. He'd seemed supportive when I was told I was the front runner for the position, but apparently that had all been an act. He'd decided the best way to secure the promotion was to eliminate his competition, and framing me for corporate espionage was his solution. My lawyer and I kept digging. We found that the IP address where the leaked emails originated belonged to Brett's home internet connection. We found deleted instant messages on the company server, where Brett had been bragging to a friend about having a plan to deal with his competition at work. The messages were vague enough that he probably thought they were safe, but combined with everything else, they painted a clear picture. Brett had stolen my password using a keylogger, accessed my email account from his home computer, and systematically sent confidential information to our competitors to make it look like I was the one leaking it. He'd planned the whole thing, timed it perfectly so it would blow up right before the promotion decision was finalized. We presented everything to the company's legal department and the investigators. Security footage of Brett at my desk, IT logs proving the keylogger installation and the remote access from his IP address. The deleted messages, a complete timeline showing exactly how he'd framed me. The response was immediate. The company reinstated me with full back pay for my suspension. Brett was fired on the spot, but it didn't end there. What Brett had done wasn't just unethical, it was criminal. Corporate espionage, fraud, unauthorized access to computer systems, the charges kept stacking up. The company, probably terrified of the liability implications, pressed charges. They didn't want it to look like they tolerated this kind of behavior, and honestly, what Brett had done had put them at real risk with their clients. The leaked information had actually damaged some business relationships. People had lost trust. Brett got arrested. I heard through the office grapevine that he tried to claim he'd just been conducting his own investigation into suspicious activity, that he'd noticed something off about my account and was trying to prove it. But the evidence was too clear. The keylogger, the remote access, the bragging messages. No investigator installs a keylogger and then uses stolen credentials to send emails themselves. He dug himself in so deep there was no talking his way out. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The company offered me a settlement on top of the promotion. They knew I could have sued for wrongful suspension, for the damage to my reputation, for the emotional distress of being accused and investigated for something I didn't do. The settlement was generous, and it came with the condition that I sign an NDA about the specifics of what happened. I took it. The money helped, but honestly, the vindication mattered more. I got the promotion. The one I'd been working toward, the one Brett had tried to steal by destroying me. And now everyone in the office knew what he'd done. There was no spinning it, no way to make himself the victim. He'd committed crimes to try to get ahead, and it had cost him everything. The whole experience changed how I thought about workplace relationships. I'd trusted Brett, considered him a friend, never suspected he was capable of something this calculated and malicious. But he'd been planning my downfall for weeks, probably smiling to my face while installing keyloggers and plotting how to frame me. Brett's facing serious legal consequences now. Corporate espionage and fraud carry real penalties, and the company is cooperating fully with prosecutors to make an example of him. Last I heard, he's looking at potential jail time, definitely a criminal record, and complete career destruction in this industry. No company is going to hire someone who got caught framing a coworker for corporate espionage. I sometimes think about what would have happened if I hadn't remembered the security cameras, if I hadn't hired a lawyer who knew to dig into the IT logs. I'd probably be jobless, possibly facing charges myself, my reputation destroyed. Brett's plan almost worked. If he'd been just a little bit smarter about covering his tracks, if our IT logging hadn't been so detailed, he might have gotten away with it. But he didn't. And now he gets to live with the consequences of trying to destroy someone's career to benefit his own. Corporate sabotage is cutthroat, but when your own boss orchestrates your downfall, that's when you realize the corruption runs deeper than one jealous coworker. I've worked in corporate consulting for 8 years, and I've seen my share of questionable business practices. Corner cutting, creative accounting, the usual stuff that lives in the grey area between unethical and illegal. Most of the time, I could rationalize it as just how business works. But when Richard became my direct supervisor 2 years ago, things shifted from uncomfortable to genuinely corrupt. Richard was one of those guys who'd climb the ladder by being ruthless and charismatic in equal measure. Clients loved him because he promised results. Upper management loved him because he delivered numbers. What they didn't see or chose not to see was how he got those results. It started small. He'd asked me to round up some figures in client reports, make our performance metrics look slightly better than they were. When I pushed back, he'd laugh it off, say it was just optics, that every consulting firm did it. I let it go the first few times because I was new to his team and didn't want to start problems. But it escalated. He started asking me to bill clients for hours we hadn't worked, to charge for services we hadn't provided, to fabricate data in feasibility reports that clients were using to make million-dollar decisions. When I refused, pointing out that this wasn't just unethical but potentially illegal, Richard's attitude toward me changed completely. Suddenly, I was the problem employee. My work, which had been praised for years, was now full of errors, according to Richard. Projects I'd been leading were reassigned without explanation. I got excluded from client meetings, team lunches, strategy sessions. Richard started scheduling important discussions at times he knew I had conflicts, then would criticize me for not being present. The performance reviews were the worst. Richard documented every tiny mistake, real or imagined, while ignoring anything I did well. He wrote me up for being late to a meeting I'd never been invited to. He criticized the quality of a report I'd spent weeks perfecting, using feedback that directly contradicted what he'd told me during the process. He claimed I was difficult to work with, that other team members had complained about me, though no one would confirm this when I asked directly. I realized he was building a case to fire me, creating a paper trail that would justify my termination and protect the company from any wrongful dismissal claims, and once I was gone, he could replace me with someone more willing to go along with his schemes. But I'm not stupid, and I wasn't about to let Richard destroy my career to cover his own corruption. So I started documenting everything. Every email where Richard instructed me or others to falsify data, I forwarded to my personal account. Every time he admitted to overcharging clients or cutting corners, I recorded the conversation. I live in a one-party consent state, which means I only need my own permission to record conversations I'm part of, so everything I gathered was completely legal. I also started quietly talking to other people on the team. Turns out I wasn't the only one Richard had bullied. There were at least 4 other employees who'd been pressured into participating in his schemes, who'd been threatened with poor reviews or termination if they didn't comply. Most were too scared to speak up because Richard had convinced them he was untouchable, that upper management would always take his side. I spent 6 months gathering evidence, emails, recordings, testimonies, financial records, showing the discrepancies between what we billed clients and what we actually delivered. I documented patterns of fraud across multiple accounts, some going back 3 years. The scope of Richard's corruption was staggering once you saw it all compiled in one place. Then I found out he was planning to fire me at the end of the quarter. One of the HR coordinators, who'd always been kind to me, gave me a heads up off the record. She said Richard had already drafted the termination paperwork, that he was just waiting for one more manufactured incident to justify it. That's when I made my move. I compiled everything into a comprehensive report, 47 pages of evidence, organized chronologically, with supporting documentation for every claim. I included financial analysis showing how much Richard had defrauded our clients, conservative estimates putting it in the high six figures across multiple accounts. I outlined the legal risks to the company, the potential for lawsuits and regulatory action if this continued, and then I sent it to three people simultaneously: the CEO, the board of directors, and the CEO of our biggest client, a company Richard had been systematically overcharging for 18 months. I sent it on a Thursday afternoon and waited for the fallout. By Friday morning, Richard was summoned to an emergency meeting with the CEO and the head of legal. By Friday afternoon, he was suspended pending investigation. By Monday, our biggest client had pulled their contract and was threatening to sue. By the end of the week, Richard was fired. The company launched a full internal investigation. They brought in external auditors to review every account Richard had touched. What they found was even worse than what I documented. Richard had been running schemes across a dozen different clients, manipulating data, overbilling, creating entirely fictional deliverables that were never actually provided. The total fraud was well over $1 million, but that wasn't even the worst part. The investigation revealed that Richard had been splitting some of the ill-gotten gains with a mid-level executive who'd been covering for him, helping him bury complaints and quash any internal concerns. When this came to light, that executive was fired too, and the company faced serious questions about their oversight and internal controls. Our biggest client sued. They demanded a full refund of what they'd been overcharged, plus damages for decisions they'd made based on Richard's falsified reports. The company settled out of court for an undisclosed amount, but rumor was it was over $2 million. Several other clients followed suit once word got out, each one finding discrepancies in their billing and deliverables. The company could have faced criminal charges for fraud, but they cooperated fully with investigators, fired everyone involved, and implemented sweeping reforms to prevent future incidents. Part of that cooperation meant throwing Richard completely under the bus. They provided prosecutors with everything, positioned him as a rogue employee acting against company policy, and made it clear they would support any legal action taken against him. Richard's now facing multiple lawsuits from former clients. His professional reputation is destroyed. He's been blacklisted across our industry because news of this kind of fraud spreads fast in professional circles. Last I heard, he was working retail while dealing with legal fees that were bankrupting him. As for me, I was initially terrified that the company would retaliate somehow, find a way to blame me for not reporting sooner, or for how the situation had exploded. But instead, they promoted me. I got Richard's position, along with a significant raise and a mandate to clean up the mess he'd left behind. The CEO personally apologized to me for what I'd endured, said they should have caught Richard's behavior sooner, that my documentation had likely saved the company from even worse consequences. My new role has been challenging. I've had to rebuild relationships with clients who feel betrayed, implement new oversight systems to prevent future fraud, and manage a team that's still traumatized from working under Richard's toxic leadership. But it's also been rewarding. I'm actually able to do the job ethically, to build a team culture based on integrity instead of fear. The other employees Richard had bullied have mostly stayed with the company. A few left for other opportunities, which I completely understood. But those who remained have told me repeatedly how grateful they are that someone finally stood up to him, that they're relieved to work in an environment where they're not constantly being pressured to compromise their ethics. Looking back, I'm glad I documented everything instead of just quitting or staying silent. Richard would still be there, still defrauding clients, still bullying employees, still building his career on a foundation of corruption and fear. He would have kept getting promoted, kept gaining power, kept hurting people. Instead, he lost everything: his job, his reputation, his financial stability, his freedom from legal consequences. And it all came crashing down because he underestimated the quiet employee he'd been trying to push out. The lesson I took from all this is that bullies and frauds rely on silence. They count on people being too scared or too tired to fight back. Richard assumed I'd just take the abuse and eventually quit, or that I'd be fired before I could do anything about it. He never considered that I might be gathering evidence the whole time, building a case that would end his career. You almost have to admire the audacity of thinking you're untouchable while leaving a paper trail a mile long. At least my boss faced consequences, but what happens when HR itself is the one covering up the abuse? I reported sexual harassment to HR on a Tuesday in March. I remember the date because I'd spent weeks building up the courage to do it, rehearsing what I'd say, gathering evidence so there'd be no question about what had happened. The harasser was a senior manager named David, someone who'd been with the company for over a decade and had a reputation for bringing in major clients. He was untouchable, or at least he thought he was. The harassment had been going on for months. Inappropriate comments about my appearance, emails with sexual undertones, deliberate touches that lasted too long, cornering me in empty conference rooms to make suggestive remarks. I'd documented everything, saved every email, written down every incident with dates and times, gotten statements from co-workers who'd witnessed some of his behavior. I walked into that HR meeting with a folder full of evidence, thinking I was doing the right thing, that the system would work the way it was supposed to. The HR director, a woman named Patricia, listened to my complaint with what seemed like genuine concern. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, assured me the company took these matters very seriously. She said they'd launch a full investigation, interview witnesses, review the evidence, and get back to me within 2 weeks. I left feeling heard, feeling like maybe this nightmare would finally end. 2 weeks later, Patricia called me back into her office. She had a different energy this time, more formal, almost cold. She said they'd completed their investigation and found insufficient evidence to support my claims. She said that while my concerns were noted, the emails I'd provided could be interpreted as friendly workplace banter, and the witness statements were too vague to confirm any wrongdoing. She suggested that perhaps I'd misunderstood David's intentions, that he was known for having a casual, friendly management style that some people found off-putting. Then she warned me. She said that making unsubstantiated claims against senior management could be considered disruptive to the workplace environment. She said I needed to think carefully about whether I wanted to pursue this further, that false accusations could have serious consequences for my career. The implication was clear: drop it or face retaliation. I left that meeting shaking, not just from anger, though I was furious, but from the realization that I'd been naive. The system wasn't designed to protect me. It was designed to protect David, to protect the company's interests, to make problems like me go away quietly. David faced zero consequences. He continued working in his senior position, continued interacting with female employees, continued making people uncomfortable while HR looked the other way. And I was stuck in the same office, seeing him in meetings, feeling his eyes on me, knowing that the people who were supposed to help had chosen not to. I felt powerless for about a month. Then I got angry in a productive way. I started digging, quietly asking around, talking to other women in the company, particularly those who'd worked closely with David over the years. And that's when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't the first person to report him. I wasn't even the fifth. One woman who'd left the company 2 years earlier told me she'd filed a detailed complaint about David groping her at a company event. HR had offered her a small settlement and made her sign an NDA as part of her severance package. Another woman said she'd reported him for creating a hostile work environment and was quietly transferred to a different department where she had fewer advancement opportunities. A third had been pressured to resign after her complaint went nowhere. The pattern was consistent and deliberate. David would harass someone, they'd report it to HR. HR would either bury the complaint or pay people off to keep quiet, and David would continue his behavior with zero accountability. And the reason was always the same. He brought in major clients. He generated revenue. The company valued his business connections more than the safety and dignity of their employees. But that wasn't even the worst part. I got access to some internal emails through a sympathetic IT worker who was disgusted by what was happening. The emails showed HR, specifically Patricia, discussing complaints about David with other executives. They acknowledged the pattern of behavior. They used phrases like managing the situation and protecting company interests. There were calculations about settlement costs versus the revenue David generated. They'd made a conscious business decision to cover up his abuse because firing him would hurt the bottom line. I contacted every victim I could find. Some were still with the company, others had left, but all of them had stories. All of them had been failed by the same system that was supposed to protect them. I asked if they'd be willing to come forward together, to break their NDAs if necessary, to hold the company accountable. Most said yes. They'd been waiting for this, for someone to finally push back in a way that couldn't be ignored or buried. I compiled everything. Years of complaints, settlement agreements, internal emails showing deliberate cover-ups, witness statements, documented incidents. The evidence was overwhelming, and it painted a picture of systemic corruption, of an HR department that existed not to protect employees, but to shield the company from liability. I took it to a labor attorney who specialized in workplace harassment and discrimination cases. She looked through everything I'd gathered and said it was one of the clearest cases of institutional failure she'd seen. We filed a class action lawsuit on behalf of all the victims, naming the company, David, and Patricia specifically for their roles in enabling and covering up the harassment. Then I contacted media. I sent the story with supporting evidence to several journalists who covered workplace issues. One of them, a reporter for a major business publication, ran with it. The article came out 3 weeks later, and it was devastating. Detailed accounts from multiple victims, internal emails showing the cover-up, expert commentary on how companies prioritize profit over employee safety. And here's where it gets absurd. The story went viral, not just within our industry, but nationally. People were outraged. The company's social media was flooded with angry comments. Customers started boycotting. Investors started asking questions about corporate governance and liability. Within 48 hours of the article dropping, the company's stock had tanked by almost 20%. The board went into crisis mode. They hired an outside law firm to conduct an independent investigation, though everyone knew it was too late for that. The damage was done. The CEO tried to get ahead of it by issuing a statement about taking the allegations seriously and implementing new policies, but it rang hollow when the evidence of years of deliberate inaction was public record. Within a week, heads started rolling. David was fired finally after years of protected abuse. Patricia was fired for her role in the cover-up. The CEO resigned under pressure from the board. Several other executives who'd been involved in managing the situation were let go or forced into early retirement. The lawsuit moved forward. The company tried to settle quickly to make it go away. But our attorney pushed for more than just money. We wanted accountability, policy changes, transparency. The final settlement included significant financial compensation for all the victims, the voiding of all previous NDAs related to harassment complaints, mandatory training for all employees, an independent review of HR practices, and the implementation of a third-party reporting system for future complaints. But the legal consequences didn't stop there. Patricia is now facing criminal charges for obstruction of justice and conspiracy to suppress evidence. Turns out, actively covering up criminal behavior and coercing victims into silence can cross the line from civil to criminal liability. Her trial is still pending, but the prosecutors seem confident they have a strong case. The whole thing took about 8 months from when I first filed my complaint to when the settlement was finalized. 8 months of stress, of reliving trauma, of fighting against a system designed to silence me. But it was worth it. Not just for the settlement money, though that helped, but because we changed something. We exposed a pattern of abuse that had been hidden for years. We held powerful people accountable. We made it harder for this to happen to someone else. I still work in the same industry, though I left that company as part of my settlement. The experience changed me, made me more cynical about corporate structures and HR departments, but also more determined to speak up when I see injustice. I've become an advocate for workplace harassment victims, helping them navigate reporting systems, connecting them with resources, sharing what I learned from my own experience. David's career is over. His name is permanently associated with this scandal. Any background check will turn up the articles, the lawsuit, the pattern of abuse. He's unemployable in any reputable company. Patricia is fighting criminal charges and will likely never work in HR again, assuming she avoids jail time. The company rebuilt its reputation slowly, though they lost significant market share and several major clients. The other victims, my co-plaintiffs in the lawsuit, have had mixed outcomes. Some stayed in similar careers, some switched industries entirely. All of them said that coming forward, finally being heard and believed, was worth the difficulty of the process. We stay in touch, a strange kind of support group born from shared trauma and collective action. Looking back, the scariest part wasn't the harassment itself, though that was awful. It was the realization that the systems we're told will protect us, the HR departments and policies and procedures, can be corrupted to do the exact opposite. That people in positions of institutional power will choose profit over people, will sacrifice employee safety for business interests, will actively cover up abuse if they think they can get away with it. But the hopeful part, the part that keeps me going, is that they couldn't get away with it. Not forever. The truth came out. Justice, imperfect and delayed as it was, eventually happened. And maybe, just maybe, the next person who walks into an HR office with a complaint will be treated with the seriousness and respect they deserve, because companies know they're being watched now. That cover-ups don't stay buried anymore. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth always has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. Whether it's family secrets, workplace corruption, or relationships built on lies, justice might take time, but it's worth the wait. If you enjoyed these stories of karma and revenge, subscribe for more and sleep well knowing that somewhere out there, someone's lies are about to catch up with them. Until next time.